What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Dynasty Underdog. Billy Beeman here. With me, as always, Uriah Dawkins. We're going to skip the Twitter pleasantries because me and Uriah are super excited to get into it with our guest tonight. We have a really special guest. The wizard himself has decided to step out from behind the curtain after concocting the behemoth that is the RSP. Matt Waldman, the man, the myth, the legend, has given us a little bit of his time here. You ready to deep dive into your process tonight?
Oh, absolutely. This is going to be fun. I like when folks want to ask about this type of stuff because that's the real kind of, guts of the work. So, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. As we were just talking about before we got on here, the work you put into this is just so impressive, man. And, just to level set a little bit with myself here, I've been doing the film evaluation for about 5 years now. And really over the last, I'd say, year or two, I've really gotten confident with it, confident with the process, confident with what I'm looking at and being able to describe in detail what's going on there. But then I hop into your document and I'm like, holy hell, I have some work to do and I have a ways to go. And, just kind of looking at it, I'm wondering to myself, how did you learn kind of what to look for? And how did you get to the point where you felt confident in evaluating prospects, right? Because I think one of the biggest things we get in the community is, okay, you're a film evaluator, but how do you know what the scheme is? How do you know what you're looking at? Like, where did that come from for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I laugh because I started off as an aspiring musician when I got out of high school. And so there's someone around my age who is a great musician in the areas of music that I really enjoy. And I saw him on Instagram the other day trying to play over a solo of a player, like transcribe the solo by ear, and he's
Mm-hmm.
playing through it. And he's just like, this guy, he's my age now. And he came on the scene when we were in our early 20s. So he's a big name. But he literally posted himself trying to play over this solo that this absolute master of a musician played when he was 18 years old. And he goes, I'm screwed. And I thought to myself, if he's screwed, I'm condemned. Okay. Like, this is like, so I would encourage you, the fact that you've been doing this for 5 years and that you're starting to feel the way you're feeling, that's great. And keep doing it because it's like, for me, I'm still learning. I still look at this, and there's players every year that I look at and go, why am I doing this again? How confident am I really about what I see?
Mm-hmm.
You're always going to be faced with that. You just get more comfortable with the unknown. You get more comfortable with dealing with the fact that you don't know everything, that you're still learning. There's still things you're going to try and tweak and figure out. And it's just a lifelong process. And that's hard sometimes, especially for me, at least when I was younger with certain things. I'd look at things and go, well, if that guy who's been doing it 20 years is saying that, do I really want to even do this? Like, what's the point?
Yeah,
Like, who
yeah.
cares? But there is a point to it because you do, for me, it was, I think, a gradual process. I
Mm-hmm.
really, this whole process that I do for the rookie scouting portfolio, it really became this huge game of I spy. What is it that I can see? And then try and tease out what's important from what's not as important. And over the course of that time, I there are a lot of supportive people along who come along the way who read your work and say, you know, for instance, a former scout and analytics professional in the league who had
Mm-hmm.
football experience and deals directly with GMs. And he said, I've been a subscriber since 2007. He was contacting me in 2011. And around that time, I was thinking, do I really want to keep doing this? And
Am I good at this?
yeah, exactly. I mean, I was literally thinking, I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep doing this. I'm working 3 jobs this is the third one. So somebody, when he wrote me and said, your process is, he said, your scouting is going to continue to get better if you keep
Mm-hmm.
working at this, but you're not on the level of like a 20-year veteran in the NFL doing this. He goes, but your process is great. and started
Mm.
talking about why it was. And, he used different wording that I'd be bragging too much if he said it, but it's like he said good things and it kept me encouraged. But then he showed me things that gave me perspective. Like he showed me other team scouting reports and why my process was doing had an edge long term.
Mhm.
And then he and other people recommended coaching books and um, different things to look at. When I made mistakes and I missed royally on players and I could identify why I missed on it, I was able to get help. I was able to find people who were guests on my show or that I did work with, and I could look at their work and say, mostly like position coaches, like wide receiver. Like I had good and bad with wide receivers, over the
Mhm.
first 15 years, I'd say. But probably in the last 7 to 8, I really started to refine my process with what I look for at that position. And part of it came from a guy by the name of Drew Lieberman, who's a wide receiver coach for a lot of pro players, aspiring pros and current pros. Dontavian Wicks is a current client of his.
Wow. Love that.
Mohamed Sanu and Julian Edelman were past clients. And his YouTube channel, the Sideline Hustle,
Oh,
I
yeah.
literally spent
Yeah.
I literally copied everything every video I could get that didn't match what I already looked at and just put it on that board behind me. And I filled up that board with all the lessons that he had and figured out how to make a process out of evaluating it. And it's made a
Absolutely.
difference. So it's just about, it's about doing the work and knowing you're going to be wrong and knowing that people are going to tell you that you don't know what you're doing and,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and other people telling you that you're on the right track and that and figuring out how to make it better. And it's never going to be perfect, but you work on that. And the thing that you also asked is about scheme and how do you know about those things?
Yeah,
I'll
sure.
answer that one quickly and just say you don't always know. Quarterbacks don't always know when they're watching it. So really, and how important is that really? Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of former quarterbacks out there who could whiteboard the hell out of a play, but at the end of the day, there was a Hall of Fame quarterback who didn't know what a nickel defense was for his first 2 years as a starter, but he could read the leverage of defenders um, on receivers, and he knew when to get rid of the ball. And all I can say is that football is not about mastering every silo because there's a ton of them. There's the athletic component, the analytical component, the scheme component, there's the technique components, there's the strategic in terms of
Mhm.
game plan. And no one is a master of all those things. I mean, like we could joke that Belichick is a master of a lot of them, but he couldn't pick anything other than a slot receiver out of a hat when it came to wide receivers,
Exactly,
and
yeah.
that's no diss to Bill. I mean, it may sound like it's a diss to Bill Belichick, but he's acknowledged he had a problem with that. You can't do everything. So at the end of the day, I mean, Mark Schofield, my longtime collaborator, who's now, over at the Vox network at SB Nation and doing a lot of Formula One stuff in addition to quarterbacking. I mean, he'll tell you, he's like, he can tell you the difference between a Yankee concept and a dagger concept, but he'll also tell you that with us watching film together, he also learned the value of like reading leverage because really it comes to, Alex Smith could identify every coverage all day, but he was always a beat or two late at key
Mhm.
moments.
Mhm.
And Brett
Oh, yeah.
Favre couldn't identify one, at all, but he was right on time more often. And when he screwed up, he didn't question himself. He just continued plugging at it and making good plays. And it's a it's a quarterback is a stage. I always say it's a stage medium and a performance medium. And sometimes part of that is not always just the theory. The theory is helpful, but it's only as helpful as how confident you can remain and making sure that you get the ball out when you see an opening, however you see it, whether it was theoretical or practical. And then on
Right,
top of
right.
it, whether or not you have the guts to continue doing so after you screwed up and threw an interception where in theory it made sense to throw it there, but everybody else watching it goes, the linebacker was right in front of you. How did you not see him? But you were
Yeah.
thinking theory instead, and then still have the confidence to go, The theory's telling me to throw this one again, but I see that linebacker right there. Can I get it? Can I get it where it needs to be? So that's the long of the short of it, probably.
I mean, it's a really, really great answer, and there are obviously so many layers to it, which makes the process pretty tough. And I think there's this misconception that you can't learn, or maybe you had to play to be able to like dissect what's going on and evaluate everything. No, but I love that, you just described how over time you were able to research, learn, talk to people, build, you know, your skill set of understanding what you're looking for and what you need to look at, right? And that you can do it that way. Like I try to explain that to people and I feel kind of dumb all the time about how I learned. And I played a little bit in high school and I loved flag football. And it kind of drove me to be like, I really love route running. I want to learn more about route running and all that. And so the way I learned about it was I started really digging into, YouTube videos, kind of like you were talking about, of, coaches discussing proper route technique, walking through it, like old videos of who was it? Urban Meyer, before he was absolutely insane. Back in the day
Yeah.
at Ohio State, he has some really awesome videos on YouTube.
He was a good
of
wide receiver coach. Yeah.
great wide receiver coach, and he has great videos on the technique. And there's so much out there that you can dig into to learn for yourself. But it definitely takes so much time. Like I said, 5 years in, and I'm like, yeah, I'm really starting to get confident in this. And then you look at your process, and it's easy to get discouraged when looking at others' work, right? Because they're going to think different than you, or they're going to have maybe what you view as a more refined process, right? And for some time, truthfully, I tried not to look at
Good
work
for you.
like yours
Yeah.
and others like Harmon's and all these other guys out there who I greatly respect, and I see your work, but I try not to dig too much into it before I refine my process to a point. And
You're on the right track. You're on the right
and
track.
okay, all right. Well, I guess that gets into, do you have any advice for those coming up in the film game? Because I do feel like there are a lot of us out there who maybe not doing it the right way. And I don't know, like, how can we be better?
Sure. The first thing, I love that you talked about guys who could, whether you played or not, because that's like the bro code, like
Yeah,
gatekeeper
right.
thing. Like,
Exactly.
did you
Yeah.
play? How, you didn't play.
You have your hand
You
in the
know,
dirt? Yeah.
yeah, that kind of thing. Okay, half of them
Mhm.
asking that didn't, and half of them
Yeah.
that did, they probably got hit in the backfield. The tingle went down their spine, and they decided that they were going to stop. Okay, so we can call it whatever you want. All I can say is, first of all, and I'll say, no, I didn't play. I was a musician. I wanted to play football, but they
Mhm.
wouldn't let me if I wanted to continue to play music.
Same.
So then I
Yeah.
then I got pissed off, and I'd play my high school teammates in tackle football with no pads on weekends with my friend who was undersized, who could hit like a motherfucker, excuse my language, if that's what it was. And
All good.
and you could literally hear the slap of him knocking down our middle linebackers, or me getting flipped over the middle, getting hit in the legs and doing a complete somersault and holding on to the ball, and the linebackers going, okay, you may be in the marching band, but I respect you. I mean,
Yeah.
but no, I was never going to be an awesome football player. I was just I probably took my physicality out playing soccer, because it's the only game that I could play, because I wanted to be a wrestler. I used to actually be a pretty good wrestler, but I couldn't be a wrestler in high school because I wanted to continue playing music, and I couldn't play football. So I was a pissed off fullback in soccer who just
Jeez.
basically guarded people who were, because I could be physical with them, and I
Talk
knew,
about gatekeeping. They
That's
wouldn't
yeah.
let you
brutal.
do anything.
So
They
I
wouldn't
couldn't
let
do,
you do anything.
I couldn't really. I mean, it was they always chose one or the other, and I liked music, and I wanted to keep
Of
doing it.
course.
And
Yeah.
so I was an all-state musician, but I couldn't do what I really loved doing. So I played. I was that annoying kid in my generation when like Nintendo just came aboard and everyone was like starting to get sucked into video games. I was that dude trying to drag my friends off the TV so that we could go play football like we planned. But they all
Yes.
laughed. After a while, they were like, "Look, we're on to you. You want to play football for 3 hours a day, every single day." And I was that guy. So, but that said, even with all of that, I'll just put it this way: I didn't play football, and clearly so. But I can tell you this: I can tell you that Ryan Riddle played football. He's he's the single season sack leader at Cal when he was playing with his teammates Marshawn Lynch and Aaron Rodgers. He played for about 4 different NFL teams as a linebacker and an edge rusher. and knows the game pretty darn well, considering he still holds that sack record. And he's the one that told me to stop saying that I wasn't a scout, because he's seen my work and
That's
told me that.
awesome.
I'll give you one more as an example,
Incredible.
because we're in the same. You're just 5 years in. I'm almost 20. I'm 20 years in without a thing. So the time put in starts to compound. I would have never thought entering
Okay.
this that I would be sitting, and I've told the story a few times on air, but I'll tell it now because I think
No,
it really
yeah.
fits. I've been a Cleveland Browns fan, and grew up there. My family grew up there.
Ouch.
My father moved to Denver when I was 2 years old and became a Broncos fan. So I would go out to Denver, and I saw more Broncos games than Browns game. And I grew up in the 80s. So my dad was all over being a fan of John Elway. John
Yeah.
Elway, is the
Mhm.
thing. Okay.
Mhm.
So, John Elway could do no wrong. I'm a teenager at the height of like, my dad's an idiot. I'm, you know, whatever. And the Browns are losing in grand fashion to the Broncos in the AFC championships. My uncle would go into the closet and hide when the phone would ring because he didn't want to talk to my dad, trash talking. Okay.
Too
So,
good.
while my dad and I are trash talking, and of course I'm coming out the bad end of this. So years later, maybe 6-7 years ago, I'm at the Senior Bowl with Cecil Lammey, Emery Hunt, is
Mm.
and Gene Bramall and Rob Rang. We're all at a Starbucks around the corner from Lad Peoples Stadium, and in walks John Elway. And if you know Cecil Lammey, who's a football guys and who is a local Denver radio host, he covers Broncos practices daily. So he knows John. John knows him. John sees Cecil. John's in there with two other guys. He sees Cecil and says, "Hey, Cecil," and says, "Hey, John." And John walks and gets in line with these two other guys. One of them clearly a left tackle at some point in his life, because you don't have that refrigerator build. You're either a left tackle or someone was chasing you around at high school trying to get you to be a left tackle, like my son-in-law. Okay, so there's that. He's walking in there, and then I look at Cecil and I go, "Do you have bail money?" And he's like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Because I'm a Browns fan, and this is the closest I've ever been to John Elway. And as a Browns fan, it's my duty that I need to sack this man. Somebody's got to do it." And so he laughs. I get in line behind them. No big deal. Think this whole joke's over. This left tackle guy standing there, John's facing me. The left tackle's between me and him. The other guy's between me and him. And the left tackle kind of turns around and then does a double take and recognizes me and turns his back on John Elway as John's talking to him and goes, "You're the guy from the YouTube videos. I subscribe to your site." And he pulls his
No shit.
colleague around, yanks him away as John's still in mid-sentence talking, and goes, "Do you know this guy?" And he's like, "Yeah, I subscribe to his work." He goes, "Dude," he goes, "I've learned more about football when it comes to the skill positions than I ever did in the NFL." And I played almost a decade in the NFL. And I'm like, "What's your name?" He goes, "Lanzino." I said, "Yeah, you played for the Browns. You played for the Packers." He goes, "Yeah, and in NFL Europe." Because we're trying to get a job from John Elway as scouts. And so and he's like thumbing at him. Elway's looking over his shoulder, looking at me like, "Who the hell is this guy?" And I look over at like Gene, Cecil, Emery, and Rob, and they're all like laughing and shaking their heads. And he's like, "Can I get your card? Like, I've learned so much what you're doing. I love what you do," and just freaking out. This is two NFL players and John Elway,
That's
and they just
yeah.
John Elway. So I'm just here to tell you, if you keep working at what you do and you work hard at it and you've got the right mindset with it, people who know the game can actually learn from you and know the game, whether you played it or not. I mean, look, Magic Johnson was a Hall of Fame basketball player, but could he coach worth a damn? I don't think. But according to what we've heard, he can't.
No.
It doesn't mean it transfers. He's an all-time great. I would love for him to coach on a certain level. Like if we had a rec team and he could coach and give us some pointers, that would be great, But it doesn't mean that you're at the highest level at every aspect of football because you're at one level at a high level.
Sounds like John Elway needs to subscribe to the channel. Like something's
Hey,
going wrong there.
I don't know, but all I'll say is, so for advice to people about that, that's one thing. Other advice I'll say is this, is that how you can get better. I'm going to give it from my perspective, and my perspective isn't the singular right perspective, or maybe even right all the time with certain things. Okay. But what has worked for me is that it's good to try and define criteria of what you're looking for. Like put it in put
Right.
define what it is that you're looking for so that you can then and define it in a way where you can answer it yes or no. And if you can't answer it fully yes or no, then you need to redefine the criteria. You need to split it out into more categories, or you need to like make it more specific and continue to be dedicated to doing that, because it's going to force you to learn about the game. And I would say, you know, take your time. Take your time watching tape and understand that it's not just about, you know, whether or not you're going to produce an end product, but try and get better at one position, you know. Try and get better at one aspect of a position. Take it in chunks at first.
Mhm.
If you're an aspiring tape watcher who is, you know, doing this and you're writing and contributing to a site, focus on something that is, you know, focus on one position for a while. Get really good at that. You know, not every site's going to say to you, "We need you to make a draft guide." You know, I know some may, but not everyone's going to do that. I mean, look at Matt Harmon. Matt Harmon
Mhm.
does one position,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that's even, I mean, I thought I was bad by saying I'm only going to do four and I'm sticking to that. He's doing one. But look what Matt Harmon's done with his career, because he dedicated to doing one thing as best as he could, and he's gotten really good at that. Doesn't mean that he isn't good at other things within it, but he's been able to leverage that. And I think that that has value, from that standpoint. I think that, you know, you want to continue to read about, um, things that may not seem directly impactful to the position that you're studying. You know, learning about line play, learning about
Mhm.
coverages can be helpful. You don't,
Yeah.
but I would say if there's a book that I would recommend anybody to read, especially if it's with the passing game, I would recommend Dub Maddox, Dubmaddox, and he's the author. And there's a book called R4 From Headset to Helmet. And Dub Maddox is a high school coach. And what I was told by my buddy Will Hewlett, who is a quarterback coach for, you know, Brock Purdy, Anthony Richardson, and now Caleb Williams. He's done work with all of them. And again, I'm this guy who didn't play the game, but I got him asking if I could show him some scouting reports you know, before even the combine started, so that he could study up on some of these guys. So again, you know, people in the know, they recognize if you can bring something to the table that
Mhm.
fans don't. So, you know, he did that. And but he recommended Dub Maddox to me, and he said Dub Maddox is that guy who's still coaching high school, because college coaches know that if he gets a job as a coordinator for their program, he's going to succeed them as the head coach. He's too good, you know. And what
Mhm.
he talks about is what a lot of players encapsulate is like, it's not just about scheme, it's about how you process information, and it's about learning how to process information. So before all this S2 processing thing started floating
Mhm.
out the past couple of years, and they're in the infancy and trying to figure it out, and it's going to have its problems. You know, for the past 6, 7 years, I've been looking at processing, like how do you process information on the field. I don't have a foolproof method for telling you who's a great processor and who's not, but
Mhm.
I'm pretty good at it, to the extent that, you know, Will told me when I first gave him stuff for Brock Purdy. I said, I've got him my sixth ranked quarterback. He's he's actually, I think he could actually be a starter at some point. I didn't think this soon, but I didn't think he'd land on a superstar team where he'd level up as fast, because there's
Yeah.
nobody making mistakes around him to the degree that you usually have. But what I did say is that he really shows a lot of advanced decision making. It's just that he can either be a half beat late because he's not sure he wants to take that chance, or he takes a chance that maybe he shouldn't at that moment, but he sees the field really well. You can tell.
Mhm.
And I gave a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
plays. So when I asked him the first time, like, how'd it go? He said, I took notes from what the film stuff you provided and the different in your. I just gave him my scouting report you saw in the
Yeah.
RFP,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and so I just did it early. I got it done in December and sent it to him in mid-December, and then like I asked him later in like March. So what did you think of it? And he goes, I took notes with it. I looked at those plays and I kept some things of some ideas. So when I watched film with them, I asked him about some of those plays. What were you thinking with some of those plays? And he said, and I'm telling you, he said some of the decisions he was making and how he was seeing it unfold was nearly word for what you said. It was kind of eerie. So, it's again, if you're looking for the right things, and it takes time. I mean, I've been through multiple iterations,
Yeah.
and I'm about to provide. I'm providing some of my quarterback stuff to an analytics guy, Kevin Cole, formerly of PFF. He's doing some
Yep.
study with some of
Mhm.
that. And, there's part of me that's just like everybody else. I mean, I know I'm good at evaluating quarterbacks versus a lot of the guys in this area. I know that I've done a pretty good job of it and I get praised for it, even though I certainly have my share of misses. But I'm like everybody else. I'm worried he's going to rip me apart. With
Yeah.
what it is, and it probably will. There's going to highlight some of my misses, and we'll talk. And he's going to highlight some of the things that will probably be why quarterback evaluation is hard. But the point being is that my advice for that is just that you got to have a cornerback's amnesia about when you miss,
Yeah.
other than
Yeah.
it's just in the fact of like, I'm gonna miss, I'm gonna keep missing. How do I get better at this? And just deal with the angst of every year you do this, you're gonna be like, I know this is coming. Jesus Christ, I've got Skylar Thompson number one overall. I just came off. You look at things like that. I just came off a stint where I'm like, Jared Goff, I really like him and I think he'll stick with it. And he starts to turn a corner. I like Patrick Mahomes and I think he could be an all-timer. And my scouting report's a bucket list scouting report on that type of player. Lamar Jackson, hell no, he's not a wide receiver. He's the best pocket quarterback in this class. I mean, I've had some good hits. And then I go look and I'm literally going, and then I look and finish and I go, yeah, not Kenny Pickett, not Malik Willis, not Desmond Ritter. You know, I like Skylar Thompson. Not only do I like him, my grade on him looks like I love Skylar Thompson, you
Oh
know?
boy.
And you're like, yeah, you're like, fuck me. This is like, that's how you feel. But you're like, but you stick with your process because how else are you going to learn? So I would tell you,
Yes.
don't, like Willie said, don't look at what I do. Don't look at what other people do for a while. Focus on your own thing because I don't look at anybody else's stuff. And then when people write me and they go, well, how do you parse out what Dane Brugler or Ben Solak or Lance Zerline said? I said, I don't know how they go about doing what they do. I'm not saying
Right.
it's wrong. I just don't know. And we would have to sit down for a while to figure it out. So follow your own thing because when you screw up, you're going to figure it out faster than if you listen to one of us and then it's wrong and you don't know why it went wrong. You just know it was wrong. And it could have been some subtle thing that just needed a little tweaking. And then you went about and changed the whole paradigm. And you wish you didn't because now 3 years from now, you're just as lost in the other direction as you were before. And so people do that and go through that. So those are some things. I hope that's helpful. I know I could probably do a lot more, but those are
No, no, please, no, that was more than helpful. But I think the best part is about your process and the process that like I'm trying to build, or that I'm sure many others are trying to build, is you have the data to kind of like look back on when you get it wrong and see you have like a lot of data, right? Especially the way you're doing it, you have more than enough data to be like, all right, let me dig in and see what's going on here. But it does have to be rewarding to hear from profession you're definitely a professional at this point, but the people that others look at who are in
yeah.
football, coming to you and saying like, what you're looking at, that definitely has to be really rewarding. And
It's the most rewarding thing. Those are my fantasy championships now at this point. I mean,
right,
that's like my
right.
fantasy football. But you're right.
That's
It's
hilarious.
and I didn't have I didn't always have all that data. It forced me to continue to
Right.
build more of it as a result of that. So yeah, I mean, shoot, you know, yeah, I could go more about some of those fantasy things, but we don't need to hear that, so we'll go on.
Well, I mean, the piece where you talk about about the definitions and creating them really hits home for me because that's actually something I did over the last year. Was I was like, I need to first of all because I want to start publishing it and having people look at it, I want them to understand what the hell I'm talking about. And I also think that there's really a lack of any kind of glossary per se for football jargon, for really scouting jargon, not football
Yeah.
jargon. You can go and find nonsense football jargon, but like scouting jargon where you're talking about, bend and curved linear movement and all these other, things looking into yours like indirect balance, like all these different ways to describe what's going on in the field. It's super, super important. And also what you said stuck with me is, I over the last year or two, I'm like, trying to split out attributes and then I felt like I was getting too granular, but then I'm looking at yours and I'm like this guy is testing the waters of how granular you can get. Do you think like that that I don't know, it gets too granular and that's a problem, or do you think that the more granular you get the better?
It's a great question. It really is. And there's days that I wonder if it's too granular. I do. There's days I wonder that. But at the end of the day, what I find is that this is the thing. Most people in our format, the reason I'm working on a revamping my glossary and doing actually a video glossary
Ooh.
over time. It's just going to take some time to do that. I'm going to have up on my site so that you can see live examples of what I'm talking about with some of these things. But I think it has value because my original work, as I've often talked about, came from operations and quality management. And so while the granular stuff sounds like, ooh, granular, it's too much. You're going to lose the forest between the trees. But really, if you're doing it right, you're prioritizing how much gravity you really give to each of these granular points. And so if you value it the correct way or in an optimal way, because I don't know if there's a correct, but in an optimal way where you know what should have the most and least value, that's doing it for you. Because if I value, one thing, I'll give you a perfect example of something that I feel like I've given too much value to, and I've been
Mhm.
waiting for the past 3 years not to give it as much value, and that's ball security with running backs. Like I'm giving them on a 100-point scale, I'm giving like the optimal amount of points is up to 10 points. And that's a tenth of your running, that's a tenth of your score. Well,
Mhm.
back in the day when they weren't splitting up the running backs into piecemeal cogs and they actually had like a lead guy, you better hold on to the ball because there
Yeah.
weren't many Adrian Petersons where they go, that's okay that you fumbled 19 times in your first season. We're not gonna relegate you to the bench and nail the coffin shut. You know,
Right. Right.
but
Yeah.
but at the same time, Stephon Ridley, he was a good
Mhm.
example of a player that Bill Belichick was like, "Yep, see ya, forget you."
Mhm.
And David Wilson went through a little bit of that. Tiki Barber had to learn how to really hold on to the ball for Tom Worthy to finally give him enough, you know. But then there's like Sony Michel in recent years who had a god awful ball security rate. Didn't it changed when he got to the NFL? He fixed it. So we
Mhm.
don't know how
Yeah.
fixable it is. So my point being is like I'm trying to figure out how much do I subtract from that? Do I make it a 5 point total
Right.
possible? 7
Mhm.
points total possible? That's something I'm looking at this year because it's a bit trial and error. And then where do those points go? Because I want to have a 100-point scale. What am I going to emphasize more because I'm emphasizing this less? What's going to get that value? So it's complex on that level, but it's so much easier to
Right.
have these things down when you're evaluating because it's like having good footwork as a quarterback. If your footwork's great, you don't have to think about where your foot's landing on your 3-step drop, your 7-step drop. You can
Right.
just survey the field, and your footwork's good enough that when there's an edge rusher getting off early, that you don't have to worry about Myles Garrett as much. If you're confident in your feet, you can slide out and get that ball out. You're not overthinking it and delaying it by a second or two, and now
Mhm.
you're creamed. and now you're really overthinking everything at that point. So when I'm in the middle of doing this stuff, I don't have to think about how much credit I'm going to give somebody. I just follow my process, and I can look at the higher level of stuff that's more important, like, you know, what am I seeing here with this technique? Is this, what context does this make sense with? What doesn't? What are things that I need to continue to get better at with how
Mhm.
I evaluate? Because now I'm not so geared on this, like, how many points should I give ball security? It's
Right,
like
right,
I'm
right.
seeing things on a
Mhm.
broader level. So, yeah, I don't think it's too
Yeah.
granular as long as you are giving the value, you're prioritizing the value well. And if you're not, then that's an easy fix first, and then you can get to the next part.
It's it's such a tough process, man, because, in the middle of doing it, like, during the 2024 class, I'm like, there's things I want to change. So now I got to like wait until this is done kind of and work it all out. Yeah. Oh, the board. No, it makes a lot of sense to me. And I have a tab on my sheet where it's, trait or attributes to add, change, update, those kind of things. So I'm definitely working towards it. And it's funny. The commonalities are striking to me. The more I learn about you, I was an operations analyst. I am a BI analyst. Like, that is my life. So this is probably why the process speaks to me really well
Yep, you're a
is like
fellow
I can
sicko.
yeah, exactly. I can really understand breaking it down in this way because at the heart I am based in data analytics. So this like process where we break it down and can look back at it and kind of improve it over time makes so much sense to me.
My daughter, one of my daughters, her boyfriend and her are both analyze drone data, and they're operations analysts on that level, right? So he doesn't
Apple doesn't fall
know,
far.
yeah, he doesn't know football at all. Um, he's from Puerto Rico. He didn't
Mhm.
really watch a lot of
Yeah.
football, you know, but he asked me about what I do, and I explained it to him. He goes, "Dude, you're an operations analyst." Like, he goes, "You're like," he goes, "You do," he goes, "You just created your own way of doing this. You're kind of sick for having done that, but like that's what you are." He goes, "You do what we do." And
I love
and
it.
it
I
was
love it.
hilarious, but I was like, yeah, I never thought of it that way. So yeah. Anyway.
No, that's incredible. I love the crossover and when you can kind of use your day-to-day work and translate it to the fantasy side of things. And then you've obviously made it where it is your day-to-day work, which is
Sure.
amazing. So you mentioned something though where, you're still worried at times about somebody ripping you apart, right? Like somebody who you respect, somebody
Sure.
whoever it may be. You're just kind of looking at your process like, what's going on here, but you're super transparent with the process. Like again, your RSP has everything you do there. If I wanted to, I can literally mimic it, right?
Yep.
Were you ever nervous about others critiquing your work before it became like really refined? And I guess to the point of I could just do what you do,
Yeah.
in theory.
Yeah.
Did you ever worry about that? Like somebody just like doing what you do and doing it better,
My wife asked me that question once when we were first dating, because I met her in 2008, and I started this
Okay.
in 2006. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I was looking at working on, like, I was at this point, I finished my operations management tenure, and I'd always written part time and did some journalism work as a features writer in other spheres outside football. So I was working at the University of Georgia at a business magazine, there as a features writer and associate editor. So I was doing that. I was about a year away from starting off at Football Guys. I was at fftoday.com working with Mike
Mm-hmm.
McGregor, who helped get me in this industry. And he and I are great friends. And I was doing that. And then we were also looking at this thing that we thought would be really a good idea. He started this thing that was basically the you play it's one-on-one football, you versus me. We pick our teams. You could do it every day if you want to. You could do tourneys with it like that. It's really just about you picking the best football team and then working it out. Does it sound familiar? you
Yeah, a
know
little bit like
yeah.
fantasy, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it's that we thought about doing that. We and I came up with the name of it, and then he had the app, and we had the test of it, and we thought we're going to do this thing. and
Wow.
we just couldn't quite get the app to market before DraftKings and the other one,
Yeah, yeah,
so we were we had one that was working before them, but we didn't have everything else ready. So we were kind of in that, and then I was telling my wife about this stuff and saying, but the
that's
thing I
wild.
really like the most is doing this draft book. This is the thing that's really my deal. And I'm hoping that this is the thing. And I have a feeling this is going to be the thing because
Mhm.
I'm stubborn and I'll probably outlast everything else that I'm doing, you know. So, but that point is she would say, well, once we start getting into it a little bit more and talking about it, she said, well, are you afraid someone's going to like take this and like do it themselves? And I'm like, no. And she's like, how do you, there's like a hubris with that. I said, yeah. I said, if you see it, come take a look and I'll show you what I do. If any idiot wants to do this for this amount of time to do it to the level of dedication that you need to do it,
Yeah,
and they do well with it, I'm going to want to take them out to eat and pick their brain on what they discovered throughout that process, because it's not just the process, it's the work that goes into it. And there's there's kind of calls that you have to make with decisions on how to get it to where this is and how to keep
yeah.
going. So it's like looking at somebody else's program or somebody else's
Mm.
brain, So on that end, I'm not worried about it. Um, I think that having a process though that's transparent is helpful, and you worry about what people think. But when you're first starting out, it was different because like for probably guys who are you guys are probably 20, 30 years younger than me in that range. I'm 54. So I would imagine you're probably in your late 20s, early
32.
30s. Yeah.
32, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
old.
There you go.
Your
So
eyes pushing 40.
Yeah,
there you go. All right. So hey, look.
yeah.
So,
Just
but I
baby
mean,
face.
in the when I was thinking about doing this, when I was your age, the only people who were in this, and first of all, fantasy football was for people who lived in their mom's basement and skate with the same fervor of skateboarders. Church leagues would be like a paradoxical statement, or like
Yeah,
central
for sure.
intelligence. It's like church league. No, there's no way. If church league happens, this whole hobby has jumped the shark. And when I got into it, we had office leagues, but even then, it was kind of geeky for a lot of people
Yeah,
in the
for
office to
sure.
do.
Mhm.
So, me getting into wanting to do this, the draft was for the real crazies, and
Yeah.
it was one of those things where only people who were scouts actually knew how to scout football, or if you played, only knew how to play football. So I had nothing to lose because nobody thought I ever had anything to gain. So really, it was like, well, we'll see. My first year I did this. I tell the story. You know, I spent a good year getting the process figured out of how I was going to do it. I spent, um, I spent about 6 months recording games on TiVo and putting them on discs and I have suitcases
Wow.
in my basement filled with like
Um,
12
that's
years of
incredible. Oh my
DVDs.
god.
Okay. I
We've
mean,
come
like,
so far.
yeah,
Come
and
so far.
if we watched them, you'd probably go, "How the fuck can you see anything going on with that compared to what HD is now?" I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I put one on and I was like, "Oh my god."
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can't. This is unwatchable. Like Reggie Bush is unwatchable now. With
Well,
these
that's like when
DVDs.
I was a kid, so it's funny because I watched those highlights too, and I'm like, "Oh my god, I can't even it's grainy, I can't see how
Yeah,
did I watch this back in the
yeah,
day?"
yeah.
It's crazy.
Imagine people with those projectors, man. Like so, like
Yeah.
yeah, So I'm like, doing that kind of stuff. And then of course I'm like, I only have 40 players done and it's like March and I've got this
Right,
full-time
right.
gig and I've got kids and I've got this. What am I going to do? I'm like, well, I'm going to run a hotel room. I'm going to lock myself in there and take a week off. I'm going to do nothing but watch film. And I'm going to stay up pretty much until I just pass out every night to do this and get this done. And I'm going to find out whether I like doing this or
Yep.
not. And if I hate it, by the time I do this and I know this is a no go, and if I somehow love it, then okay, we'll see what happens. So I did that. I think I worked 100. I logged it. I worked 129 hours that week. Okay. Yeah. I literally
Yeah.
just I would lock myself in a hotel in downtown Athens from walking distance downtown. I ordered takeout most of or either takeout or delivery.
Mhm.
And I literally slept maybe 2-3 hours a night at most. Um, watching people like Bruce Grodkowski and Matt Leinart and Vince Young,
Yikes.
folks like that. Yeah. And 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 when I was
Sorry.
done, I even like brought my own TV, my own TiVo, and my computer
Oh
to
my
the
god,
thing
dude.
so that I could be comfortable doing it. And and when I finished, I knew I loved it. And I was like, yeah, I'm a special kind of crazy. I love this. I want to do this. And so then one of those players that I watched was this guy named Mike Bell. So running back out of
Oh, yeah.
Arizona. He
I
was
remember Mike Bell.
undrafted. And I had him, I
Mhm.
think, sixth or seventh on my board. And I was like, and then I started looking at what other people had for him. And I was like, well, what the fuck do I know? This is my first year doing this. It's okay. I don't know. No one's expecting me to know, you
Yeah.
know?
Mhm.
And lo and behold, he became a starter in his first year. And I was like, okay, maybe I do, And there's going to be false confidence and false arrogance and false hope with things where that
Sure,
spur you
sure.
forward. We all have it. Like you
Mhm.
don't get started in this. You get started in this and you think I can do this better than those guys that I see in the magazine or on the YouTube channel or on Twitter or wherever. Everyone thought that. Everyone thought
Yeah.
that. So, from the process standpoint, what I would say is that you know you develop confidence, and some of it is false and it becomes true. Some of it is true and it keeps leading you in the right direction, and some of it is just being able to go, it's okay, I don't know any better and I'm trying to learn. And if you come to it from a place of truth like that, and people understand that, people will understand that about you and see that purveying your work, and they like your honesty. The people who get me and are repeat customers are the ones who are like, I know that you stick to your own voice, you're always trying to learn, and go from there. And you're not always, and they have perspective to know that you're not always going to be right. But I don't want customers who would pay $100 or $200 for my product, but think that they fucking own me by being able to call me at all hours of the day while I'm actually trying to do the work that you're paid
Right,
for,
right.
so that I can cater to their needs, because they would pay that kind of money thinking they're masters of the universe and they can call someone at their beck and call and show off to
Mhm.
their other fantasy people as the manager in their office or something,
Mhm.
because they don't feel confident enough about what they do at home or in their life to like just be like cool, and so
Just
you,
be
you
Just be
know
normal.
you
Yeah.
just be
yeah.
normal.
Yeah.
Instead they
Yeah.
want to run somebody, or they feel like let's or that they want to pick on every little detail that you didn't do right because they're paying you and therefore they own you. And
Mhm.
Yeah.
instead,
Yeah.
people, so you want to draw the people who are your audience. And my audience are people who have enough perspective to go, I want quality information, but I'm not expecting it to be perfect. I'm just expecting to understand the why behind everything of what he does. And I do that more, probably better than anybody, is explain the why behind what I do.
I agree.
You might be the only person that's really, I mean, Harmon probably does a good job of that
He
too,
does.
of being pretty transparent. You guys are probably the few that do that, that really show every detail of your process. And that is really a place I want to get to, because like I said, I'm so much more confident in my process now. And we do, like, I do film, the film room stuff for the YouTube channel and all that stuff. So I'm trying to show my work, but the actual notes and the grading, I've been hesitant to, more so because like I feel like there's so much more refinement to do before I get it to a place where I'd be comfortable doing that. But again, that might not be the best process, because the way you've done it has really given such good results, in that it kind of forces you to improve your process
Yeah. But
every
don't
time, right?
you just don't look at YouTube comments. Don't look at YouTube comments.
Well,
Don't
yeah,
look
I
at
don't
Twitter
really.
comments. I mean, I can do a little more of that now because it's like I'm where I'm at. But if I had that in the beginning, it probably would have been a lot harder. Don't do it, because it's like
That's true.
you're going to be harder on yourself than anyone else. They're just being abusive. You be critical of yourself. And the people who are being critical but not abusive will probably email you to go out of their way to help you, as opposed to people who are just online because they think they can say anything and it's okay. It's a game, you know? So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, admitting your mistakes is something we really try to do around here actually, just in terms of, year to year fantasy, hits and misses, all stuff like that, but also with the film evaluation. So I mean, I think that brings a ton of confidence from the audience, right? Because they know that you're not just going to BS them all the time. With that said, we've talked a lot about like what your process looks like. So I don't, and also you've kind of said that you don't really know what other processes are, which is fair because they aren't all that transparent. And I was going to ask you, how is yours different from like a PFF? And it's like we don't really know, right?
No
So,
idea. I mean,
so
like, I mean, I could give you some little answers, but it's
sure. I
like,
mean, go for it if you want.
well,
Yeah.
like I gather that they have a team of people who chart games, but I
Mhm.
don't know how they chart. What I do know is
Mhm.
it's what I would guess. Like I would see, and I'm not going to say PFF itself because I don't know, but I see people oftentimes use things like accuracy charting. Then they'll
Mhm.
say, well, his box score accuracy is this, and it's box score accuracy, and they're not really charting. They're just
Gotcha.
like they're just saying complete. They're saying where did the completion percentage occur, and
Mm,
completion percentage is
mm,
did they catch the ball, not whether it was placed in the optimal spot. And that's important. I've often talked about how Baker Mayfield was a good touchstone point for that with his
mm,
career because
mhm.
some evaluators were huge on Baker because
Yes.
of the fact that his completion percentage, but at the same time was like, well, against tight man coverage that he's going to see in the NFL, not so good. Like he's a beat or two behind often
You,
for
you
what you
talked about this
project
a
in the
little
NFL
bit.
game.
You talked about this a little
Yeah.
bit on, I think JJ's pod
Yeah.
about like contextual accuracy, right? I think is what
Yes.
you're kind of talking about.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
see, I just saw Ben Solak today come out on
Mhm.
with the Ringer and his charting stuff, and Ben's great at what he does. I don't know how long he's been doing it, but from what I may be wrong, and if I'm wrong about this, I'm sorry, I'm saying it this way because Ben does good work regardless. Like, but
Mhm.
I'm almost a little flattered because from what I saw, I'm like that looks like RSP stuff, in terms of how they're charting how he's
Would not
charting
surprise me at
the
all. Would not
from a
surprise me
quarter
at
stem,
all.
the
Yeah.
quarterback. So I don't know if he did arrived on that on his own or whether he saw some of my stuff and did that because we've done shows together. And I'm
Yeah.
flattered by it. I mean, he's not stealing anything in a criminal sort of way. He's just taking something he thinks is a good idea and is going to use it. So good for him. It's but I would say that the contextual accuracy is important. Yards after contact, is that really an important thing? Or are you grading how people are getting tackled? I noticed that, like, I think
Mm.
PFF was one that, Saquon Barkley as at Penn State, he leads all running backs in yards after contact. And then I think about how often I would watch someone fly swat, Saquon Barkley on a thigh pad
Sure.
and him run for 70 yards. And meanwhile, I'm watching 10 games of Nick Chubb and he's getting hit in the chest by linebackers and
Yeah.
defensive linemen and getting 4 yards. And I'm going, which one's harder here? Like, I mean, I think
Yeah.
everyone knows what's harder, but we're
Mhm.
not, but we're going with a stat that makes no sense that doesn't show that. So, those are some things that I think matter. Matt Harmon talking about separation. He's not talking about whether he caught the ball. He's talking about whether he separated.
Mhm.
That's great context for that. I
Yeah.
don't do that. I probably could say I should. I don't know if I have time. But I know that the process of how to get separation I do because that
Mhm.
projects well towards eventually getting to that result. And for me, it's about projecting. I've always talked about scouting this way. If I could sum up scouting in a long ass sentence, it would be, which I tend to do a lot of. It would be that the physical, technical, conceptual, and intuitive skills at the position that you need to be able to put yourself or put your teammates in a position to make positive plays. Because what that says is it's not about whether you made the positive play. It's about whether you have all the elements to put your teammates or yourself in position to do so. And that means that even if the
Mhm.
outcome was bad and the process was good, then it's projectable to the NFL as long as you're looking at these things to what you think an NFL standard is. And that's the key. So if
Mhm.
you do those things, you know, I think your process will be on the right track.
It's actually a great answer that, I figured we'd just bypass it, but that's a great answer. And honestly, when you talk about, because I think we all know that the way they do it is a team of people charting, right? And I think that inherently has its own problems, because if you have multiple people doing it, they're even if you're working off of the same process, they're unlikely to be seeing the same things. So it's much more difficult to have a uniform grading system that way, in my opinion.
Yeah, my process was actually derived from running teams like this in just a different industry. And they sent me to learn some best practices on how to control variation within a process to so that you
Mm,
can reduce that level of variation that occurs. So even though the RSP is a single man process, it's totally rooted in what it is that a team like that would need to do to make it better. So I just I
that's
and I and I
it seems
literally
counterintuitive. It really does.
yeah, but I decided I was tired of managing people in this type of environment because I used to do operation stuff where I was more training people and
Hmm.
creating the
Hmm.
production. I was more the production guy. I was known as a very productive manager with productive teams who had great quality. So when I decided to get out of the operation sector and do quality, I learned this stuff. They sent me down and paid a nice little sum to have me get trained to learn this stuff so that I could kind of deliver it company wide. And as I started doing the RSP, I had some people come out of the woodwork going, man, I'd love to be able to work with you and we could
Right.
use your access database and we can turn it into something more with a GUI interface and
Hmm.
make it that kind of thing and sell it to the NFL. And I'm like, first I'm like, you have no contacts in the NFL, so that's probably not going to work because they're insulated. Number two, like, who's going to manage these people to make it worthwhile, because I'm sure shit not wanting to do that anymore.
Right.
I want to do this by myself. So yeah, you're right. You nailed it. And no one ever talks about that, is that it's hard. It's hard to manage that. But yeah, my system was designed to actually manage that variation so that you could have a team. I just love football. And I thought, I want to do this by myself and see how far I can take it and learn on my own. That was really all it was.
Yeah, I love that. You have to be kind of sick to do that, and that's part of, like, you were talking about really loving the process. And I was watching like Jalen Coker today, and every once in a while I'll watch like a guy, and I'm like, man, this is why I love this process so much. And it's not that I love the prospect or anything necessarily. It's like I don't know who this guy is, and now I really want to watch him and figure out like what he can do, what he can't do, and all
Yeah.
those things. And that hunt is obviously what drives us a little bit there. And also just touching on the fact that your process is built to kind of mitigate the different minds kind of working on the same process. I don't think it really works that way with football, though. Like, maybe with other processes it does work that way in other industries, but with football there is so many like potential biases that can happen when watching any one prospect, that I think it's just so difficult to ask 10 guys to do it the same way. Like, it's not going to work that way, which is why I think a process where one person is doing it is much more reliable. And
Yeah.
even if it's challenging and difficult and takes forever, like, it's probably the best way to do it. So with all that said, I do want to know, because you just finished up this class, and looking at your RSP, I'm like, this got to take forever. I know how long it takes me to get through, one prospect. It takes a long time. So, you're definitely winding down a little bit, right? You're making the rounds. But when do you start scouting the next class? Like, I'm just interested kind of when you dive into
Sure.
the process.
Sure. And let me just mention something about bias. Like
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
I doubt anybody in the NFL is watching us, but let's just say if, for instance, somebody is, and you would like to hire me to do like process renovation. Now, I would say I really like my job. But if you want to like give me like the dream opportunity and we're on the same page about what that dream actually is, I'm open to the idea because I do believe, while you're right, there's going to be variation of knowledge, but there's things that you can agree on to help educate everybody to eliminate the low hanging fruit of bias. Because as we've often talked about, if you have a scoring scale of 0 through 9, nobody gets a 9 and a 7 through 9, and nobody gets a 0 through 1. You, that's inherent, very, inherent bias that you can get rid of right there, because you're already gatekeeping the scoring system. Also, if you don't have clear definitions of what you're looking at, then you're not sure, like, maybe somebody's better about looking at footwork than you are on your same scouting group. But why shouldn't everyone know what the footwork you want your quarterback to do at the Baltimore Ravens? Why
Yeah.
shouldn't that certain things? And why should it be where, like, Matt Williamson telling me way back in the day when he became a scout? How'd you become a scout? Well, I watched football with a couple of coaches in the Pittsburgh area, and then there was an opportunity to become a scout, and I took a test where they basically had me watch football and mark down what I saw. They didn't tell me how I did. They just told me I was hired. I said, was there any training after that? No, they told me if I wanted to learn a little bit more, I could go to player meetings, positional meetings if I wanted to. But it was just a ton of work, and I was just expected to know what I was doing. So that's my point, is that, like, you can eliminate a lot of trouble if you're at least the coach, the exec, the owner. Even if the owner doesn't want to be involved, which, God, I hope they don't want to be. Some of them, But if
For
because
sure.
they're just like the
Jerry Jones
president.
get in there.
They're
Ugh.
just
Hey,
they're like, they're the president of the organization, and sometimes they change things at the last minute that they've paid people to do, like,
Right.
17 months worth of work with. So, if they've, you know, Pittsburgh's owner, I would love to have him in a room, because he's got perspective. He gets it. But looking at it from that perspective, those are guys that, those are things where you can get on the same page with things, and they, now you can teach people. Now you can
Yeah.
eliminate some of the dumb errors out of what you're doing, and you are in a situation where it's a lot, you end up having a lot more opportunities for discussion to grow what you're doing. And now the coaches and the scouts are on the same page. It's not an adversarial relationship between coach and scout, or, you know, exec and coach, which often is the case. So, from the standpoint of my evaluations, I usually start in late June or early July. Um, and I'm trying to get, I try to get somewhere between 1 to 2 players done a day during that period. Watch 4 to 6 games, um, during that period of time. Usually,
Mhm.
really 3 to 4. I usually try to watch 3 to 4 of 1 to 2 of 1 to 2 players each day during that period. August starts to get busy with fantasy football, or busier than what it was in June and July, where I'm doing stuff, but now it's really at a heightened level where every piece of news everyone wants to, psychoanalyze and, treat like it's, it needs to be looked at like it's an alien fossil. um you know so
Microscope. Yep.
yeah, microscope, exactly. And then, during the year, I'm trying to watch, 2 to 3 players a week, where I'm watching, 3 to 4 games. And then, so I'm steadily doing it. And if I can get to about 80 to 90 players by the time it's early December, and I can get to about 100 to 115 players by mid January, I'm in pretty good shape, so that I can take the entire, um, month off of March, where maybe I'm watching 1 or 2 players, before I start each chapter of, like, writing the chapter and finalizing my rankings. And finalizing the rankings involves watching more games from players, because now the combine came, or now I noticed this one thing is lacking that I didn't get a chance to see with 6 games. I need to watch 8 to actually end up seeing it. Or now I'm going to go, or I've seen all these things I want to see, but you know what? I haven't seen certain things, the potential for, like, what they do best. And it's fun now, because now, instead of back in the past where I had to watch highlights and hopefully get, like, game tape,
Mhm.
and then I found, I mostly got game tape, but occasionally I had to watch highlights with one or two players, and I'm going,
Oh, yeah.
well, folks, this is highlights. It's going to stink, but here you go.
Mhm.
Um, Now I actually watch highlights after I've done all the evaluation because the highlight packages usually show the very best things they've done. And some of those things may be the only time you've ever seen them do it. So it may show some level of athletic ability you haven't seen or some level of difficulty that you go, okay, was this lucky? You can sometimes discern whether it was lucky or whether it was, real legitimate skill integrated on a number of levels. So, that's generally my process is June through late June or early July through March.
No, that makes sense, and some of these are selfish questions because, like, I'm running up against it this year, and I'm like, I need to get started earlier too, and I'm just interested in kind of
Sure.
when others get started, you know what I mean? And because I feel like I need to get started, like, now on next year's
Yeah.
class, just kind of, again, with how, I'm refining the process and feeling about it, I want to get it going in a more
Yeah.
quicker fashion for sure. Your point on highlights, I really like. I lost this quote that I had written down from Lance Erline years ago when I heard it on a podcast, but essentially it was, if you're ignoring the highlights, you're going to miss out on a lot of really good players. And
Yep.
so for me, the highlights always are the very final piece of my evaluation. Like I go through at least through. I try to get through 3 to 5 games. Really, that's kind of my threshold at least
Sure.
there, and then I'm hitting highlights and I want to see like the best things that they can do, and I don't want to overrate those things, but I want to rate those things. So I think it's a really good point. I think one thing about like the PFS stuff, and you mentioned this, but I do question how well the definitions are taught and stuck to by the evaluators, right? And
I do too.
I'll say this, like I was years ago, I say years ago, but somewhere in the last 5 years, I reached out to whoever was leading the PFF stuff at the time, and I was like, "Hey, like I'm looking to kind of get more into this." I was thinking that would be a good way to refine my skill set a little bit, and I ended up getting my hand on their like definition book of sorts, and I just found that I didn't quite agree with everything in there, and then also I thought to myself like, how are you making sure if you're hiring me online, then I assume there's a bunch of other people remote. Like, there's not a great way for you guys to get us in a room and say on the whiteboard, this is what we're looking for and this is what it needs to be. And I
Yep.
just really question whether that is occurring and everybody's on the same page.
And no offense to PFF, there's a lot of things that they do
Yeah, yeah.
well, but I would agree that I have doubts that any organization calibrates very well when it comes to that kind of thing, and and most of them probably aren't using best practices to figure that out. And I could say from what I've seen and what I've looked at, and then what I see they say, I've seen that. I've seen the same thing. I go, yeah, there's some variation here with how they're
Right.
looking at it, and it's all over the place. So yeah.
Yeah, and again, like I'm not trying to beat down on PFF or anything.
No,
They do a lot of really good work, like
sure.
and there's a lot of really good work out there. I just think that there's a lack of that transparency and also a lack of the I think internal refinement for like these companies that do it. So when somebody like you has really refined their process, Matt Harmon has really refined their process, it just is so much more reliable in my
Yeah.
opinion. So I really like that's kind of where you've taken it. What are your thoughts on the people who kind of say that the pre-draft film work that we do offers diminishing returns and that everything needs to be reworked once we get the draft capital?
Oh, I love that question because I get this question all the time in the form of, "Can I just buy the post-draft RSP and I'll pay the same amount, or can I get a discount for it and just not have the regular? I wish you just sell them separately."
Jesus.
And so what I would say, and when I say this happens, it probably is 1 out of every 95 people that
Really?
that
That's
says
crazy to
that.
me.
It's not that many. It's not that many, okay? It's very rarely does it happen, okay? Maybe 5% of the time. I bet it's not even that much, maybe 1 or 2% of the time I've had that happen. It used to happen earlier when I first published the post-draft. When I just
Mhm.
did out a pre-draft and I had the post-draft, people would come out of the woodwork who were just fantasy people, and they were like, "Can I just need this?" And I go, "Listen, you don't get this without the pre-draft because the pre-draft works for this. If anything, I would charge more, you know,
Yeah,
because you're getting,
absolutely.
I charge more for my projections and rankings because
Right.
all the work I do in the RSP informs those things.
Yeah.
So if you want the quick answers, then you're fucking paying more for it. Okay. And most people are,
You're
Hell
not getting
yeah.
the spark notes around here. You're not
yeah,
getting the
yeah,
spark notes.
and most people know. Most people tell me they'd pay more and tell me I should charge more anyway. So if I get to say that, they're like, yeah, okay, I'm not saying anything because he's right. Like they know. But the point being is that when I would say, listen, give the pre-draft a chance because the post-draft is going to tell us, yes, about draft capital and position and that kind of thing. And that's going to be important and valuable early on in their career. But at the end of the day, it's the detail of the pre-draft that's going to help you, especially when players get cut or
Mhm.
somebody rises up the depth chart and nobody in your league knows who the fuck this guy is.
Yeah.
And you do, and they're now about to have a bidding war on him, and they go, "Oh shit, dude over here got him 2 weeks ago. How the fuck did you know about that guy for 2 weeks ago? He wasn't even playing. He like blew up and you picked him before that." And they're smiling and going, I ain't telling you, you know,
Mhm. Mhm.
and then after about 5 years, they go, okay, look, after my third championship in 5 years, I've heard this, I've gotten this email a lot and I love it. As they go, I finally go, look, to make the league a little competitive, here's Matt Waldman's RSP. I mean, like,
Yes,
it's a
yes.
bragging point. So, but that's the thing is people realize that the pre-draft information, when you do it well enough, it provides you intel for
Mhm.
players that everyone else has written off or never even knew about. And that, or they change schemes and now they're a fit for that scheme. Like Raheem Mostert, he bounced around everywhere. I didn't scout him, so that's not a good example for me specifically, but he's one that comes to mind is that he was a hell of a gap runner. I could totally imagine if I scouted him at Purdue, I'd go, he's a good gap runner with a shit ton of speed. If he gets an opportunity here, he's probably going to be pretty good. And he looks like he can catch some, you know, that's probably what I would say. And if someone was looking at the RSP pre-draft, they'd probably see that and go, "Oh, he's in San Francisco, and running all these gap plays. Yeah, they're running outside zone. Well, and the way they run outside zone there might as well be a gap play because of the way that they ask him to do it.
Yeah.
So this might be a guy to get, and those are the types of things that pay off because when you get those difference makers, they make as big of a difference for your team as the first round picks that you hit on.
Like I so much love that answer because you hit on what I think is so important and it's being informed, right? Like people for some reason think they're going to have the same exact information if they just wait till after the draft. Don't ingest anybody's film evaluations and just kind of, go by the ADP or whatever by the rankings. Like yeah, we'll find them. But I don't know how many times last year and I don't know how high you were on Puka, but for an example from our
Yeah.
side of things, I wasn't like supremely high on Puka, but we were in on this guy is pretty interesting. There's a skill set there.
Yep.
He could develop maybe in the right situation, right? He falls into the Rams, and I had people like friends that I'm in leagues with in my DMs like sending me the camp hype and laughing at me like, haha, this guy's gonna be absolutely nothing, da 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 da, like constantly saying those things. And so even when there are signs, if you're not informed and really understanding like why we should be interested in this player or just be informed about this player at all, you are going to be behind the eight ball. I really believe that. And I think part of the process for me, like I don't even feel like I can properly talk about a player if I didn't watch the film. Like I don't know how, like, and I'm an
Yeah.
analytics guy. So like I'm ingesting analytics. That's not what it is. But when I don't watch them, how can I tell you how they move? How can I tell you anything about this player? So when people don't want to ingest any of that information, I just feel like they are so far behind the eight ball and missing a really key cog in the entire machinery that is evaluating players that are, going to the next level.
You're totally right because actually film is data. Film is a form of
Yes.
data.
Yes.
You just got to figure out how to collect it in the same way that people have to figure out how to use the statistical information that they have and create good data from that, which is a challenge for them still. In the same way, it's a challenge for people to watch film, and because that people say film doesn't lie, but I say film doesn't lie, but your eyes can if you haven't been trained to it enough, and it can lie to us all. So. But you're right. I mean, looking at those players, it is important. And I've gotten plenty of emails from people who go, man, my league mates laughed at me when I picked this
Yeah.
guy up in this round. And then they're like, how the hell did you know that? When now that I'm beating them and I'm points leader and all that. So yeah, it's the same thing.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so I do want to get there's a like we're talking really more process and everything here, and I have a couple more questions. I do want to get into a couple like position player specific things in a
Sure.
few minutes, but I do have a couple questions that I want to ask still. So one of them is, and we talked I think a little bit around it, but how are you preventing bias from seeping into the evaluations? Like a player on your favorite college team, right, or a guy who you've just fallen in love with for whatever reason. I think a lot of people struggle with that part of it. It's one thing that I really think we do a good job of in general at Dynasty Underdog, but I really pride myself in kind of like when I go to look at a player, it's like blank slate. Like I don't even know who this I don't even want to know who this guy is really. I just want to see what he's doing. And I try to do it that way, but how do you prevent bias?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think first thing is admitting that we all have it,
Yeah.
and just saying we're all going to have it, and we all going to have to figure out ways to deal with it. I think one of the fundamental
Yeah.
things that I do is I follow a process that's pretty rigorous. I mean, when you've got over 100 points of criteria that you're looking at, you're so focused on the granularity of those details
Right.
that the bias is harder to seep in because you're looking at what so many different things of what they can do and can't do that once you look up, you may have liked one play that really caught your eye, but after a while, it's that shine's going to wear off. It's kind of like dating, okay? Like you know, you know, I would look at it this way. When you're, you know, if when you're dating out there and you're meeting someone that you're attracted to, there's the psychological theory that you have certain characteristics, physical personality, voice tone, facial expressions that are all imprinted on you because your mommy and daddy, when you were a little kid, when they first gave you love and affection, or the lack of love and affection, whatever combinations it was at those given times, were imprinted on you at that time where you were most open and observing the world and knew very little. So your brain was like, soak all this input so that we can have some output later. So
Mm-hmm.
that imprinting happens. So my theory is this like, you know, I dated when I dated, and I found myself attracted to certain types of women, and they could be very different in terms of what they did, what they looked like, all those different types of things. But there were commonalities in terms of how they were personality wise. And the younger I was, the more dysfunctional I was as a person. I just was. I
Facts.
grew up. I grew up in a
As
dysfunctional
it goes.
environment, and my parents did the best they could, but it was what it was, and um, and so I had dysfunctions, and I was drawn to people who also had dysfunctions, and their
Mm-hmm.
dysfunctions mimicked some of my parents' dysfunctions. Even if I was trying to run away from it, I was running directly into it. And then
That's
as
so
I
real.
and
That is
then
so real.
as I got my shit together and started to like do work, went and got therapy and started to figure out that like
Mhm.
I'm not able to have worthwhile relationships that are going to be lasting because I need to work on myself. And as I did that, now the same people I'd meet people who had some of the same characteristics, but they were more refined. They weren't like they weren't dysfunctional anymore. They were just issues that they had lapses with that you go and they know about it. They go, listen, sometimes I have a temper and I fly off the handle, but I'm not gonna, I'm gonna need a moment to just calm down and gather my words. And I'll
Mhm.
be a little sharp, but I'm not, but I used to be an asshole when I would say things to people. I would, but I'm not that way anymore. I've worked on that. And you can see that they have. Whereas the last person maybe I dealt with was maybe even like verbally abusive in the way that they would talk. Same continuum, just one's a healthier version of it. So that long explanation is to say you can have biases where players that you grew up watching that you admire, or that Max Headroom over here, we got, he'll get back, but
Yeah.
but we'll get Uriah Bob
Oh
Harris. This
man.
happens to Bob occasionally, but yeah, we're good. But there are, there's players that you admire, and
Yeah.
when you see ways that another player moves that reminds you of that,
Mhm.
that it's kind of an imprinting. So for me,
Yeah.
I joke I joke on the more standard scale that if there's a running back who breaks a lot of tackles with good vision and quick footwork, but he's slow, um, I'm gonna probably like him. Like just from seeing him, that's the thing that appeals to me. But all the other safeguards that I have in place in terms of how I watch talent and the priorities of points aren't going to allow me to overvalue things that I shouldn't overvalue. So I may like people may go, you like slow running backs, Garrett Blunt, Peyton Barber, Spencer Ware, Trey
Yeah, buddy.
Sermon, things like that. Sometimes I'm going to miss certain things. I may
Mhm.
overemphasize certain level of speed or something like that. And maybe he gets a higher grade and he's not quite there at the level that I thought he'd be at. But more often than not, those players, as 3 out of the 4 I think I mentioned, turned out to be better than what most people thought and outplayed the faster
Mhm.
guys that had long careers. So, there's things like that you if you have a clear process, it keeps you from overvaluing things that drew you and attracted you to them and want to like them. But after you
Yes.
looked at everything, you evaluate and go, okay, look, like you're dating somebody, you go, yes, I find her attractive. She's pretty, she's smart. I just love the way she smiles at me. The way that we have this banter is awesome. We have these things in common. Jesus, I finally met a woman who actually likes to watch a football game, whatever it is to you that you're
Sweet.
thinking, right? Like, oh, and she can throw a football too. Like, on top, see,
I got one like
every
that,
foot,
all
yeah, see, there you go.
right?
So there you go. So like you look at all that, and then after a while, you start to realize, okay, but can we have a conversation about real things? Does she spend money
Right.
like it's going out of a sieve? You know, is she responsible of a human being? She can be honest with me as a human being. Can we argue and it not be like a horrible thing that we actually had an argument? Can we do all those important things that aren't sexy, but man, when you're married for as long as I am now, it's awesome to have someone like
Matters,
that.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
now, like maybe 30 years ago, I wanted to be able to throw football and know something about football. But my wife doesn't know a goddamn thing about football, other than that if someone clotheslines someone, that's an awesome play, even if they get kicked out. But like, she's a basketball person more than anything. But like that's great because we got everything else that's awesome. But that's the thing is if you have if you're looking at the right things, then
Yep.
the thing
Mhm.
you just accept that I've got a thing for this. I've got a thing for slow running backs who break tackles and have good decisions. And I am a divining rod for wide receivers who get in trouble off the field, even if I didn't know it until after I watched the film. So that leads into the next thing. And I'll say this: I wouldn't look at their history. I would turn the sound off on when you're watching a game. Don't
Mhm.
listen to anybody talking about the player.
Nope.
Don't know as little as you can about what the player's background is, because as one of my writer friends said, I love watching Dane Brugler's The Beast because when I read that and read yours, it's like I get the depth with yours, but with Dane's, like he does a really good job of talking about how Jalen Wright was this third string guy on this team and worked his way up. And after reading
Right.
that, like I love him. I'm in love with him. And he's a journalist my friend who's written for like
Yeah.
does investigative journalism and he's great at it. But he's not doing investigative journalism watching football as a fan, but you see where the bias seeps in. Because if I learned that Lamar Jackson won the Heisman Trophy 6 months before I watched him, and I watched like 5 games before I figured out he won the Heisman Trophy. Um, you know,
That's awesome. Yeah.
I was just looking on his bio to see if he missed games. And then I ran into, I said, I'm glad I watched 5 games first, because the Heisman Trophy could do two things. You could either be like, oh, he must be good, or you could say, oh, nobody who's won the Heisman Trophy is worth a shit as a quarterback, at least from an old school perspective, or oh, front runner, he's probably not that good. You're
Yeah.
going to have these weird attitudinal things. So just eliminate that. You know, if you eliminate all that, don't look at the bio until you finished watching the player and you are completely done. Watch more games too. That's another
Yeah.
one I'll just add. Nick Chubb, that's a perfect example. I fell in love with watching Nick Chubb because I love running backs and he's big. He breaks a lot of tackles and he's got great movement and decision making. And I totally was in love with him. Then he got hurt. And I went to Georgia and I'm not a Georgia fan, but still, I've covered them as a kid, like as a young man,
Hmm.
and I worked at the school. So there's a little bias that's going to be there. When he came back from the injury, I watched him and I thought, he doesn't look any different to me, but everyone's talking about him like he's broken down Frank Gore at the end of Frank Gore's career. And he's just going to be like this smart. He's like Peyton. They talked about him like he was Peyton Barber. So I was like, okay, how do you deal with that? You might be biased. I just watched as many games as I could. I watched more games on Nick Chubb than I watched on any player. Okay, because I knew what the inherent biases might be and what might be attributed to me, even if they were wrong. So I was like, you better be fucking sure that you think this is the best running back
Yeah.
in the class. So watch more games if in doubt.
Yeah, I mean, these are all great answers. We got evaluation lessons and life lessons around here on this episode, and I absolutely love it. Seriously, I do. Yeah, in terms of defeating the bias, I think creating the process really that's the allure of it, right? It does that. It helps you kind of inherently defeat that bias. You kind of talked about this a little bit, so we don't need to
Yeah.
touch on it too long or anything. But I guess I want to know: do you think there's like a threshold of games you need to watch to be like, okay, I can complete this evaluation? Or is it just like you were saying, like as many games as you could possibly get in?
I think you can probably do 3 to 4 or with certain positions. Like running back, I think you can usually do 3 to 4. With wide receiver, I think it's somewhere between depending on what type of skills they what type of role they have, it's either 4 to 6 or 6 to 8 for
Mhm.
me.
Okay.
Tight end, I would say somewhere between 3 to 4. And quarterback, I would probably say more like 6 to 8 or 8 to 10.
Yeah.
You know,
So tough.
it,
Yeah.
but the same thing I'll say this, imprinting can also be a good thing. And when people say to you, I remember hearing Coach Dave Wanstead say, I gave Dion Lewis a scholarship after seeing like 3 plays. Like I saw 3 plays from the recruiters and I
Just
gave him
based
a
on
scholarship,
vibes,
you
vibes
know?
based
And
analysis.
and
Yeah.
it sounds like that. And I thought that's fucking ridiculous. That's awful. And then about 15 years into evaluating, I watched a player. He was on my TV. I was recording the game just to make sure I had it, in case my other sources weren't going to give me the tape I needed. And I watched 3 plays of him against LSU. He was at Texas Tech, and I thought, "Oh shit. This Patrick Mahomes guy,
Oh, no
he
shit. Wow.
is awesome." Like I this could be like the Brett Favre like type of evaluation. Like
Wow.
I see this guy,
That's
I
impressive.
see this guy. And I turned off the TV because I had shit to do with other players. I'm like, I cannot watch this guy because I'll get sucked in. But I knew, like, I was like, I'm in love with what I just saw. Like, and it was just
Wow.
3 plays. But
Mhm.
I watched a ton of tape because the being a scout isn't just about that once in a lifetime, and it may happen a handful of times where you look at someone and go, I just know balls to bone. This is the
Mhm.
dude. And can't explain why that is, but I'm an intuitive person. But being an intuitive person in an analytical field, that means you better not let that intuition get too far. You need your analytics to be, you need your analytical side to explain everything that you think you saw. And if it can't, then you probably need to stick with the analytical part. And if you want to describe to people, I have a feeling about this guy, but I can't explain why. If you're going to go err on one side, err on the due diligence. So doing your due diligence, even
Mhm.
if you saw one game and you think you saw everything, do 3 or 4 more just to make sure. Because I've been proven wrong on that end too, where I've seen someone and I go, oh,
Yeah.
and then I watch the 3 or 4 games. I go, no, he's way better than I thought, or he's a lot worse than I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are really good answers, and I think that per position actually makes a lot of sense to me because some of them are just a lot. Well, you're looking for less attributes for certain positions too, right? Like
Or they
for
get the
tight end,
ball more. That tight end, yeah, you're looking the same as receiver, but you're also looking a lot at blocking, and there's so many blocking reps that you don't need to see. Whereas with
yeah,
receivers, maybe you need to watch more to get better blocking reps or certain route running reps or certain
exactly.
or really certain
Releases. I
reps
want to
that
see a
get
certain release. I want to see whatever it is. I need a guy pressing him. Like I can't
yes.
watch this off
Yeah.
coverage. Like it doesn't work.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And it's like, okay, well, I know maybe NC State plays press, but they're not playing NC State. So I got to find a team where they can. And I don't
exactly.
always know right ahead. So I'm watching, go, well, I already saw that. And then, or that you're in between two areas. And with quarterback, there's so many variables. Again, watching more games helps you see a lot of those variables because the higher rep positions sometimes you can see less, but it just depends. I mean, there's game plan scheme, how many reps they get, the
Absolutely.
role they have, all of that.
Okay, so let's get position specific now. Okay, we'll get into some players here as well, but what we were just talking about leads right into kind of where I want to go with it. Quarterbacks. You're talking about you need more like 6 to 8, maybe more games to evaluate these guys. How are you determining something like decision making or what the goal of the play was? And you might have answered that earlier. You don't really care about that, but I guess you do care about their decision making and how well they can perform at in that respect. How are you kind of determining that? Because I think QBs are really like I find this one of the most challenging things to kind of evaluate.
It sure as hell is. It really is. So it's one of those things where, I'm looking at do I see notable adjustments pre-snap where they're signaling to their line to either make an
Mm-hmm.
adjustment with their blocking scheme or whether that they are changing the play? Do they get the opportunity to change the play or and move things around? Now, I may not always know what they really specifically were doing without, but I know usually you can tell whether they're making a change to the play and you
Yeah.
can start to reverse engineer when you're watching to see what it is that they were looking at. So there's that. Are they noticing any type of pre-snap movement by a defender in coverage or alignment change by the defense? And do you see them notice it based on what what happened pre-snap and then how they move or who they look at post-snap?
Mm,
That can tell you some things right there. Early post-snap, do they notice the change or the disguise being lifted, in a certain scenario? So there's that. You're looking for down and distance situation scenarios where you're like, I don't really care so much what the play is, but if it's, you know, second and second and 10 backed up and inside their own 5, and the quarterback's going to have to drop back here, are they going to throw the ball away in a timely manner? Or are they going to try and
mm,
roll out of the pocket and thread the needle into somebody into tight coverage or hold on to the ball longer and scramble inside the pocket when it's the second
gotcha.
quarter of a game and they're up by 3? Why are you doing that? That just makes no sense. That's a thing that pro quarterbacks would throw the ball away quickly. So there's
Yep.
things like that, like those types of decision making and game management you're looking for. You're looking at, do you notice the coverage drops? You're going to look at certain types of coverage and you're going to, even if you can't tell me whether it's a cover 3 cloud or cover 3 sky, or whether it's, a cover 2, you know, or a hybrid coverage where it's a cover 3, but you have some man underneath, or you have man on one side and cover and zone on the other. What you can look for is you can divide the coverage up into triangles of defenders, you know, and read the defense by looking at the triangle around the receiver that you're looking at. Who are the 3 defenders within that area? And what position do they have relative to your receiver?
A nice little
And
cheat code. I like
yeah,
that.
yeah. I mean, that's something that I learned from that's how receivers learn zone coverage. They're looking at zone coverage by looking at the
Mhm.
triangles. They should be, at
Huh.
least it's taught in some ways. They're
I used
looking
to
at
think about sorry, I used to think about
yeah,
soccer in this way, in
yeah,
3-person zones, but I never brought it to the defense. in
Yeah.
the NFL. That's actually a really heady play. I like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
because you can look at the linebacker, the safety. Usually you're looking at a linebacker, a safety, and
Hmm.
a cornerback in the triangle. And you can see, well, this is where I'm going to need to settle. This is where I'm going to have to
Mhm.
keep running, depending on the route. Some routes you keep running through it, but you have
Oh,
to know
wow.
where to
Yeah.
turn your head because if you turn your head too early, it tips off the defender because the quarterback is waiting for the receiver to turn their head on zone because they may not be reading the full triangle because
Right.
they're looking over here and the crossing routes breaking across over here and now the pressures come and they've got to turn, plant their foot and throw. And if the receiver, what they're looking at right there isn't studying the triangle,
Right.
sometimes it is, but not for that scenario. They're looking to see if the receiver is looking at them. Because if the receiver is
Mhm.
looking at them, the receiver's saying, I'm open, give me the ball. And they're
I got the
trusting the
window. Yeah.
receiver, which is why sometimes people go, that quarterback should never thrown that ball. The linebacker was
Mhm.
staring him in the face. And you're like, yeah, but he just made a 90-degree turn with a defender, 325-pound defender bearing down on him, and he's looking for one piece of information that's supposed to rely on him. It's like saying, it's like you're climbing a mountain and someone you look up and the person gives you the signal that the rope's staked and tied to the rock the way it should be,
But
and
it's
so that
not.
you can uncouple and hold on to the rope. If they're looking, they give you the wrong signal at the wrong time, you're a pancake and over with. So it's like that's the same thing. So things like that,
Okay.
I would say, whether with processing is very important. So you want to see anticipation. Are you looking at the route, knowing what the route is? Because you can go back and say, okay, he ran this route. I watched the whole tape through to see what the route was. Look at the route and decide at what point of where the defender is relative to him at the top of his stem is he going to break open? Because you can tell by the position of the defender whether the route will break open. And the quarterback should know that. The best quarterbacks know that. They look at it and go, "Oh yeah, that defender um has outside position and he turned his hips outside on a route that's going to break inside because the receiver did a good job with the route." Well, if at the top of the stem the defender's got his hips turned outside, you're like, now the only thing that should be going through your head is like you should be thinking about the whoosh of your arm going over your shoulder,
Mhm.
you know, those types of
Absolutely.
things. And
Okay.
and that's the
Yeah.
speed of aggression that you're looking at. It's so people get too caught up in the grammar of it all with all these like they think they got to know scheme and things. I know scouts who literally tell me like I couldn't tell you the difference between a cover this and a cover that or this type of thing, but I can tell you what they should be looking at with the defense.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's why like former quarterbacks can give you valuable information about quarterbacking, but get it wrong when they're scouting quarterbacks. And people who aren't quarterbacks and have never been quarterbacks, other than in the backyard or at the park, um, you know, can tell you about leverage and say,
Right.
this is what's really important. So those are the things I'm looking for with decision making, and I categorize them into consistent adjustments, risk management, timing, controlled aggression, and coverage read.
I love that you gave the categories there because that's actually what I wanted to finish on with that because it does I think highlight like each aspect of what you're looking at in a really defined way. So I really appreciate that answer. Really covered it for me. Talk to us a little bit about Michael Penix at running back. I'm sorry, running back at quarterback too. Considering like I've seen I don't know if again I know you don't ingest a ton of other people's evaluations necessarily, but a guy who's catching a lot of steam now this year I've seen is like Dynasty Zoltan has come on the scene with his stuff, and I've seen him say like he doesn't even think that Penix is like a starting level quarterback.
He is.
So there's some thanks you're
Sure.
right. There's
He is.
there's a big gap in I think the evaluation on Michael Penix across the board. It's not just between you and him necessarily, but this is I think as high as I've probably seen him rated by anybody.
Yeah.
So what is it about him that sends him up the list for you?
Well, he graded well in terms of accuracy. I know that Ben Solak came out today and said he
Mhm.
didn't grade him well in accuracy. So, but I don't
Okay.
know from his charting, but I don't know
Hmm.
how he charts. So, we'll find out, where that goes. But from what I saw, he threw a lot of passes that are where they should be for the receiver to make the play. Where he thought
Mm,
they bailed him out, I thought actually he was throwing the ball where it needed to be for the receiver to make the play. It was the only place they needed to be. And sure, there were times you're always going to have some throws where he got bailed out. But from the sample size that I watched, I saw enough games. I think I watched 8 to 10 of his games and
mhm,
charted them, and then watched more than that just to fill in blanks without charting. I certainly can tell you his accuracy rated out pretty well. It was better than average. It was better than I thought it would, what it was portrayed to be in the middle of the field. So I saw him as much more of a multidimensional quarterback who played very well in the pocket,
mhm,
and actually bought time the way that you want to buy time, which is climbing the pocket and making efficient movements and showing control to deliver an accurate pass in various ranges of the field after climbing. Because it's not just whether you buy time, it's whether or not you buy it efficiently and whether you can get an accurate throw off after you do it, you know? And
mhm.
so in those areas, I thought he was good and he was a smart decision maker on top of it, especially at Indiana where he was wearing pressure like a second layer of skin. So, you know, I was like, I
Oh,
he turned out good. Do I think he's an instant starter? No, but I think he got a grade that was high enough for me that if someone was foolish enough to throw a quarterback in there early in his first year, which the NFL is apt to do, he might actually survive it better than the other guys that are going to get thrown in there. And
wow, yeah.
I would just hope, I don't think it's going to happen, but I would hope that the Minnesota Vikings get him because I think in 3 years, Justin Jefferson won't be begging to get traded when
Wow.
they get Drake May or get a Sam Darnold clone like Drake May, which is kind of where I see Drake May at this
Now
point.
we see the JJ McCarthy cloak. That's what it's all about. Is they're just trying to throw everybody off the scent. They're going for Penix. I like it. I
I
like it. They
hope
can just sit there and wait for Penix, right? They don't even need to trade up at that point.
that's
Yeah,
what I'm hoping for them. I would love to see
yeah.
that because can you imagine how good of him.
That's actually a very enticing landing spot. Yes,
It's a
for
great
sure.
landing spot for him. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, he's got things to work on. He's gonna have to look, he's not gonna see the quality of defenses that in the NFL. He's gonna see much harder defenses than what he saw in college, but so is everyone else. He's gonna make some
Hmm.
processing mistakes, but he's better then I mean, like people get into narratives, and you look at the Texas game and the Michigan game, and they're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
Michigan played pro style defense," and da, 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 da. And he did not chart much different than he did in the Texas game, which was a very good game for him. So it's again, they're looking at results sometimes more often than they're looking at process. For me, the process was good.
Process over results. That's what we preach around here. Okay, let's move on over to running back. I want to know, in your opinion, how important blocking is at the running back position. Like, do you weigh it differently than other skills like vision per se?
Yeah, I mean, like for me, let me look at where I weigh blocking in terms of the amount of point values that I give. Um, with pass protection, no, it's only 5 points out of the 100 point scale, so it's
Okay.
not massive, but it can be the difference between really, let's say, being a starting caliber, really good blockers, 4 points, not great, but really good. Jonathan Brooks is the best blocker in this class. He's got 4.5 points. All right.
Hmm.
Ray Davis is one of the worst blockers in this class of the higher end prospects, and he has one. He has 1.5 points. Okay,
That's
so
shocking to me because I thought the same thing, but PFF has him graded as like the top, like top in the class or like
yeah,
third in the class or whatever, which is goes back to what we were talking
well,
about before.
yeah, because again, that's probably outcome over process. So what they're doing is they're not
Hmm.
projecting what they need in the NFL. So if a guy drops his head into a defender and doesn't punch, but the defender doesn't get to the quarterback, that's a successful block. Whereas for me, that's not a successful block when I know that Aaron Donald is going to see that dropped head and work around him. And anyone who's not even remotely in the same neighborhood as Aaron Donald, but means he's still twice as good as whoever's come out into the league, most likely from college that's faced
Yeah.
this guy. Because they had the same thing with oh, who's the guy? Deonta Foreman. They thought he was a great pass protector. I didn't. And it was because I was projecting the techniques that fly
Mm.
and don't fly for the NFL. And they were projecting success rate. and that's
Hmm.
different. So that may be a
That's
difference with
super
that.
interesting.
It's
Yeah,
kind of
that's
like it's charting again.
yeah.
You got to you got to project to the success what the NFL, what's going to fly. And you got to be more technically sound. If you get away with it in the NFL every once in a while, that's great. But if it's like Terry McLaurin as a receiver. If you trap every ball to your chest, I'm going to bet 9 times out of 10 or 90 receivers out of 100 that they're going to struggle doing that in the NFL because most do. I've had 3 receivers that didn't, and
Mm,
Quentin Johnston was one of those receivers that did, in terms of what he does.
yeah, yeah.
But I would bet on that all day. But Terry McLaurin is a bumblebee where he defies the laws of football essentially and flies, So I'm okay with that because prove it to me
Y
because everyone
yeah.
because 95, 90, 95, 99 times out of 100, I'm going to be right. So if I'm wrong with you, good for you. You're awesome. But
You beat the odds, right?
you
That's
beat the
fine.
odds. Good for
That's
you.
fine.
So Ray Davis, if the difference between 1.5 and 4.5
Yeah,
is 4 points, right? That's almost a tier in my ranking and scoring. So it still makes a difference. It's the difference between being
okay,
a
yeah.
contributor who they can say, we'll put you in situationally, short yardage, red zone, first down, maybe second down and short. We'll put you in here. But third down, no way you're touching that. Jonathan Brooks, though, we're putting you in because everything else, if everything's scored equal, and the only thing separating
Yeah.
them is 4 points. Well, let me look at my grade. I haven't even looked yet. Let's just test that. Jonathan Brooks, I had an 86. All right. Ray Davis, I had an 81.6. That's that's um
That
that's
works out well.
4 point. Yeah, that's 4.4 points, right?
That's
Or
pretty
five,
good. Yeah.
yeah, or yeah, it's 4.4 points. I said 4.5, 4.4. That's the difference between them in there's a lot of differences, but the main difference
Yeah, yeah,
is one can pass protect and
and
he's
the other
an
can't.
instant starter, and the other guy is a good runner, but he can't pass protect yet, and he's on the border of contributing.
So, I don't know why I draw this comparison. I mean, I think it kinda makes sense, but I think a lot with this year, the Bucky Irving versus Kyron Williams comparisons that are happening, and this is just one part of the game that I think that Kyron is so strong in that Bucky isn't, and not that they completely match up as players otherwise, but there's definitely some similarities. And then you see the RAS score is terrible and all that stuff. But one of the things that really kept me hopeful for a guy like Kyron Williams, and that's why I was asking this question, because I think it does have a fairly significant impact at some level, which clearly it's showing itself in your rankings. That's just it just can mean the difference between success and failure at the next level, in my opinion. And especially when we're looking at fantasy, like you're talking about, you want the guy on the field for all 3 downs. Like that's what we're talking about. So love that answer. Isaiah Davis has gotten a ton of buzz. Like really over the past couple of weeks, we're hearing a lot about this guy. I checked out your rankings real quick, found him at running back 29.
Yeah.
What is he lacking that makes him tumble down the board that way for you?
Well, for me, I felt like he processed slower than his workout times. So like he
Okay.
wasn't didn't think he was a great decision maker in zone and gap. He may work out just fine. So if he lands in a gap heavy system, maybe he can become a contributor. But I still thought that even in gap schemes, he could be a little bit slow to recognize certain things, and his overall movements were slower than what his speed was. He's a good receiver and good route runner. Like that's
Hmm.
surprisingly good. There's elements there that it can be fairly strong, but I see him as more of a backup who if you
Okay.
put him on the field, he can acquit himself, but he's not a guy that you're looking at as an every down starter.
Okay, yeah, I think he's one of those guys converted wide receiver to running back, so the pass catching skills definitely translate. I think this next section is going to be a lot of fun here talking about the wide receivers. What I don't know if I've really heard this talked about that much, and maybe it has been, but I'm really wondering what separates a Dunze from the tier one guys. And to me, I'm thinking Marvin Harrison Jr. And Malik
Neighbors.
Neighbors versus the next tier below him. And honestly, I should have looked at your tier specifically, but just the way I'm thinking about it, Okay, so he is in the first tier still. So he's in that tier, I guess. But what separates him from those top two guys, if anything?
To me, he's my number 2 guy, so it's
I
really
see that now.
what
Yeah.
separates
Oh, yeah.
Marvin Harrison from the top 2 guys.
There you
That's
go.
fair.
Above
Yeah.
him might be a more way I would reframe the
Wow.
conversation.
Okay, let's
Love this
go with
guy.
that. Let's go with
Yeah.
that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just put it this way: is I mean, part of it is again how you evaluate players. If you're evaluating for a team that needs a, a split end who's going to served more as a T. Higgins early career Larry Fitzgerald,
Yeah.
Mike
Yeah.
Williams type of player, then Marvin Harrison Jr. is probably that guy you're looking for. Sans some of the after the catch skills that at least two of those three guys do show at moments, like Fitzgerald and Williams did. Now, if you're looking for if you're like me and you're like, I'm team agnostic, so I'm trying to look for a broader range of all the things that fit the resume with a certain level of depth, and I'm just looking to see who the best overall receiver is, regardless of scheme, and who could fit more schemes than not, it's going to be Neighbors and Odunze because they both run
Mm,
better routes. They release from the line with more efficiency. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a very good player. He's one of the higher scoring receivers that I've had in recent years. He would be top. He'd be the top guy in a lot of other classes, you know, um, or at least top three, top two easily. So the fact
mhm,
that he's third is no shame to his game. But the difference is when we're splitting hairs is at the line of scrimmage when he releases, he opens his chest too early to the defender
mm,
and against zone coverage or against man coverage against savvy man defenders, he's going to get jammed if he doesn't cut that out quickly. He may fix it quickly. He may not realize it until a top defender is basically owning him for a game and the next one's owning him for a game or 4 or 5 games go early because he drops his hands sometimes before he
mm.
brings them back up. So it's like he's like doing the bro down, that you see from like South Park. Exactly,
Yeah.
And and when you do that at the line, Jalen Ramsey's gonna eat you alive, or whoever it
Yeah,
is that is
sure.
a good press corner. So that's an issue. Then you on top, again, he has good release movements. He has a lot of good skills he can do that with. But then also, there's some stems that he can round off a little bit that he needs to be a little sharper with. Not a huge deal. He'll probably fix that, but there's going to be some times where defenders who are on top of their game are going to cut him off if he doesn't fix that. Okay, compared. Again, I have him as not only an instant starter, an instant production leader for the team. So I'm just talking about if he's going to be that, he's going to face the primary cornerback, and he's going to have moments where these quarterbacks get the better of him because of these things. He's also going to use his hands incorrectly because there's times that he tracks the ball and goes, you know what? I don't want to put my hands up tight and catch the ball in front of me here. I want to turn and let that ball go over my head and use over the shoulder so that I can run downfield as I catch it. And I end up dropping the ball because my hands aren't in the position
Mm,
they need to be when I do it. I do it last minute. I wind up clapping on the ball, or I just miss it completely because I'm not trying to cash it at its earliest point. And defenders also can get into me. And he drops more passes than you would expect
mm,
from or not what you'd expect. He dropped passes legitimately due to that reason. And that's a minor detail because he does make some incredible catches and he does a great job catching the football overall. But it's common enough that it's a problem that he can address and he needs to get better
mhm,
at that these other two receivers don't have that problem with. They catch the ball technically sound in most scenarios, and there's not a singular scenario where they have trouble. I think Brock Bowers is a great tight end. We'll probably talk about him or maybe, but he
we
has
will.
one
Yep.
specific issue where he drops the ball consistently.
Mm,
And,
okay.
look, Cortland Sutton is a good NFL starting receiver. Whether you think he's a good fantasy player is another story, but whether he's a good NFL starting receiver and, pretty good bet to be a wide receiver too most years, you know. So you could say that, but he's also that guy that you could maybe it's a little hyperbole when I say this, but you need to feed him at least 7 to 8 targets because he's going to drop one or two of them, if not three, in a game. He's going to make big plays, but he's going to drop some. He's like he's like the guy who gets on a hot streak in basketball who you have to feed the ball to. He's kind of a black hole,
Just
you
give it to
know.
him.
You just got to give it to him enough, and he'll go on a hot streak and becomes unstoppable. But if you don't give it to him enough, he might be like 3 of 8 in the first half of the game or the first 3 quarters. And if you don't keep feeding him, you miss out on the chance that he's going to go on a 7-for-7 run and take your team there. And Cortland
Right.
Sutton's that kind of guy. And Harrison may not be that guy, but he does has some flaws that has led to drops. And it's not like McLaurin, who had flaws but just caught everything. And I just can't see that working in the NFL when he faces these scenarios. And he said, yeah, well, fuck you, because it does, you know. So it's but that's the difference between them. And Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze are route runners with a wide enough route tree that translate well for them to work all 3 positions, where I think Harrison's more of a 2-position guy.
Wow. That's some really interesting stuff there. Definitely the hands, I don't think that I picked up on the film, so I will be definitely watching some more to see if I can see what you're seeing there.
And if you don't, I've got a YouTube thing, so you can find it. I did it
Perfect.
last August, I think.
Perfect. I'll check that out actually, and we'll go with that as the starting point. How about that? So I want to know with Brendan Rice, because I like a lot of what I see out of Brendan Rice. I know, easy
Yeah.
with it being a Hall of Famer's son and all, you can definitely hype yourself up for him. But I did see some good route technique. I thought that he used some really good manipulation movement. What flaws do you see with Brendan Rice's game?
Not many, because while he's low in my rankings, he would have been a top 10 receiver easily, maybe even top 5 in a lot of classes otherwise, just with his score. He's a lot like his dad in certain respects, just maybe not quite from an ability standpoint. So when I hear him jokingly bash his dad or have conversations that I've heard in passing where I want to say, dude, like, what's wrong with you? Like, because your dad was a goat. And for you to
Yeah.
say Justin Jefferson is better, maybe that might bear out, but you're too young, dude. Like, all right, like, I love Justin Jefferson, but let's get real for a minute
Pump
before
the
we go
brakes,
there.
pump the
Yeah,
brakes.
pump the
Yeah.
brakes, my man. But like, here he is. The thing about him is that he's a decent route runner. He can refine man to man a little bit better with his breaks and his setups. Can be a little better that way. It's nothing awful. It's just that he's a little better in shorter ranges than he is in intermediate ranges. He's a little better on the boundary than he is breaking inside. But the elements are there for him to improve that. He is a sturdy receiver who can make catches against tight man coverage and hits. Very good at that. But he also clap attacks balls where he drops a number of passes because he doesn't have his hands in the optimal position and he ends up fighting the ball a little more than you would like to see. So there's issues with that. So those are really the main things that I really saw with him, because he has an instant starter grade for me.
Yeah.
He's really good after the catch, like his dad was, where his dad was a little maybe quicker and than he is. He's a better
Very true.
tackle breaker, and he does better job of getting his feet high to run above shots to towards his lower body. So he's an intriguing player. I think he'll make a very good number 2 receiver at some point during his career. We'll have some good seasons in that capacity.
Love hearing that. Really do. All right, so I took a look at your composite rankings for the last couple years for the wide receivers, and I found Brian Thomas, who I very much like as well. So not really taking a shot here or anything or digging on you, but just wondering what pushes him ahead of a polished player, polished prospect, I should say, like a Chris Olave, because you have him ranked above him.
Yeah.
How does that work out for you with Brian Thomas, who I think just started playing football in senior year of high school or something?
Yeah. Well, part of me would say, as a big Chris Olave fan, I forgot about that, that was the case. So do I have a good answer for it? But I think the answer really is that Chris Olave is a very good route runner, a strong receiver. I would say that Brian Thomas has a chance to be a little bit more dynamic as a runner after the catch. He's more powerful than Olave is, so that gets him some points. He's a better blocker than Olave is, so that gets him some points. That might be the difference just right there between the two, because Olave might even be a little bit of a better route runner, but the things that Thomas Thomas isn't that far away because the elements physically are there, and he's shown a lot of the decent skills to continue to grow that are going to make him efficient at telling the story and doing it in an appropriate way for the route that he's running. And as a pass catcher, he's a strong pass catcher. I didn't see really any issues with him tracking the ball. He's very good in the vertical game. He's probably a little bit better vertically because of the combination of size and speed.
Mm-hmm.
Olave is maybe a better technician at this point, but I would say that Thomas is a better athlete in certain areas. And because he's not that far away as a technician, he came out just a slightly above, I would bet.
That kind of lines up based on what I saw. So that makes some sense to me. Just how good of a route runner Olave was. I think that's where probably the disconnect for a lot of people is. But I agree with you that there's not a ton of development needed to get Brian Thomas kind of where Olave was or is.
But everyone's afraid because they logo scout. They're afraid that he's going to be the next Terrace Marshall.
Of course.
When
Of course.
everyone thought that Justin Jefferson was the next Brian
Terrace
Thomas.
Marshall.
The Brian Thomas they're saying he is, not what he really could probably be, which is good. Yeah.
All right. So talk to me a little bit about Ricky Pearsall over Ladd McConkey. I already have, before I even saw your ranking of him, I had Pearsall on my list to go back, rewatch, and watch more because just everybody seems to be a little bit higher on him than I am. So yeah, talk to us a little bit about Pearsall over Ladd.
Well, I mean, I love the joke that I'm a Georgia kid who lived in Athens for many years, and I even have a gator over this bulldog that everyone's going crazy about. But I think the
that's
main,
crazy, a gator. Oh boy,
but
FSU.
yeah,
You got a goal
exactly.
right here.
See, there you go. Well, I went to University of Miami before that, so I'm a Miami. If I was a college fan of any team, it would be Miami because I went there in the late '80s.
Rivals
So
all around.
yeah, see, there you go. My first game was when they played FSU. And shut them out in Miami. That was the first college game I saw, and FSU was all over SI because those were some great rivalries. Screw the Notre Dame rivalry, that was a joke. FSU was the worthy rival.
That's the one.
Yeah. But Pearsall is just slightly above McConkey. I mean, it's so close. It's just nominal. But the difference for me, the main difference is that when you scout players, at some point you have to score guys not on the assumption of whether they can do something, but whether or not they've proven that they can. And you can give them some credit for that you think that they will, but that's a projection. And a projection that someone will be able to do something versus what someone actually already can do, if it's the same thing, the person who's proven it already should have a higher score than the guy who you think can but hasn't got proof. And that comes to contouring defenders' hands with your hands in press coverage. I saw Ricky Pearsall do it on a regular basis and do it effectively. I never saw Ladd McConkey do it. Ladd McConkey played a lot inside. When he played outside, he won all the time just with his feet, which is impressive because you want to win with your feet first, your hands second. And the fact that nobody could cover him with just his feet is very impressive. And maybe that makes him slightly better. But he is going to have to face defenders who are not all that impressed with his footwork and are going to try and get physical with them. And is he going to show that he can handle that? And not just in practice, in like real games. So they're in the same tier. They're in the same spot, nearly in the same tier. So if you like McConkey more, I'm totally cool with that. But on how I score and how I have to keep the integrity of my scoring system until I change it, Pearsall proved just a little bit more in that area. So he earned what was it? 1.1 more points than Ladd McConkey, but they're in the same tier. So yeah.
Yeah, no, and I love the way that your rankings do it because it offers you like everything that like tiers, the tiers and you can see the score and how close it is within the tier. So like it does make sense, but I did want to get into that a little bit because I didn't see what I really just wanted to hear what you saw from Pearsall, and that actually makes sense because you don't see Ladd even in those situations really, and like you said, it's the projection thing, so it makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's hop into our last position group here. You've been so gracious. Seriously, Matt, like you've given us so much time, and
But
sorry
man,
for running long.
you guys
Like,
ask great questions. And the fact that I can do this, I have people who follow my podcast. And if someone asks me for the 10th time why I'm low on Drake May, they're going to tune out to that. But people are going to want to listen to some of this stuff because they have the same questions you do. So I
yeah,
appreciate that you ask them.
no, I appreciate that. And honestly, just listening to you on other shows, and whenever I try to bring a guest on here, like I'm trying to think from like a higher level perspective and really dig into stuff that I don't think that is always talked about. So yeah, I'm glad that you're feeling that. All right, so tight ends, we're jumping into tight ends here, and you did mention that we were going to get into Brock Bowers a little bit. He's a unicorn. Obviously, the dude is one of the most electric tight end prospects we've seen in a long time. But does the size present any issues at the next level, or was it just really the hand stuff that you mentioned earlier, kind of dropping some passes?
Well, if we were in an NFL back in the day where we're still looking at tight ends as inline blockers and you have to be that, then it would be a problem. But nowadays, really, you need to divide tight end body types by move tight end and inline tight end. And sometimes you're going to get a guy who can do both. But Brock Bowers ain't that guy at 243 pounds. He's a backside blocker who has good technique for a backside blocker at his size, who can help you with double teams and quick hitting things into routes or certain types of lead block scenarios where he can be a fullback or H-back. He's a great blocker from that perspective. And that's the only perspective you need, because if you're trying to make him Rod Gronkowski, then you're doing drugs. That's basically,
Did you see them next to each other? It's like father and son. Like they're not even
yeah.
close. Yeah.
No, exactly. Mutt and Jeff, Laurel and Hardy, whatever generation you were from,
Yeah.
that's totally it. So Bowers, the big thing for me is that, when you watch him at the catch point, when he has to make a catch high and away from his body, he clap attacks balls and he fights or drops them. Now, he can make some seriously awesome one-handed grabs. We've seen that against tight coverage, against hits. He can get ping-ponged off people. He's a great pass catcher. He's just not a perfect pass catcher, but he's still the highest graded tight end that I've had in multiple years. And I've had high grades for Laporta, for Darlington Kincaid, and the kid down here in Atlanta, Pitts, who's going to go off this year. That's, I think that
Sure
those
hope
things,
so.
I think so. I think, unless Kirk Cousins can't get that Achilles right, I don't think there's going to be a problem. I don't think there's going to be a problem. But
I think you're right about that.
yeah. But Bowers is good. I think I think if there's a player that resembles this guy's maybe a little bit before your time, maybe not. But when I first got into this, Vernon Davis was the combine darling. And he was an excellent player. He just never got to fully play to his potential physically. Aaron Hernandez, is radioactive in terms of him being a killer, and what happened in his career. But as a scout, and we're talking about scouting, we can compartmentalize and say he was a hell of a tight end in an H-back form, and really the prototype on the field for what you're looking for in an H-back and a move tight end. He could do it all. He could run, he could catch, he could run after the catch between the tackles. He won plays like a wide receiver on the boundary. He could block. He was great. Brock Bowers is that kind of player. He's between Vernon Davis and Aaron Hernandez.
That's a great comp. That's not one that I kind of put together for some reason, but that is a great comp for what Bowers can be.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you watch him, like, I know that some guy apparently, I saw this and just laughed. I mean, like, Twitter's amusing. Like, look,
that's why we're there.
Exactly. If you look at it, today I was at a message board with some industry colleagues, and they lament about Twitter, and we all lament about social media one way or the other. And I go, look, it's a kitchen knife. Twitter's a kitchen knife. And if you don't realize that it's a tool or a weapon that you can either hurt yourself with or hurt somebody else with, and that it's a kitchen knife before you've gotten any home ec training or home training from anybody. And you thought that you already had home training until you started using it. And then you realize that maybe you needed some home training.
Keep cutting myself. What's happening here?
Yeah, what's going on here? I just cut off my fingertip. Now I got to get it sewed back on. It's never going to be the same. It's going to hurt in the winter, that thing's going to happen, So, when you look at this, the reason I say that about about this stuff is that I looked at somebody saying Brock Bowers is going to run a 4.840, or he probably ran a 4.8 because he didn't want to run.
Yeah, he didn't run the combine. Yeah, so he's not. We don't know if he's athletic.
All I know is if these SEC defensive backs who were on the same side of the field with him with an angle on him after he stopped and reaccelerated and blew by them, and was beating receivers who were on the outside who were beating those cornerbacks, and he's beating them downfield and they had angles on him. All I know is he can run a 4.8. Go ahead and say he ran a 5.8 or a 9.8. He can run a 9.8, and I know he's still fast because and the combine and I'm sorry to inform you, GM, who probably is just smoke screening to get him, if he or trying to, is that, as I've mentioned, the combine doesn't even have, it has maybe the third best or the second worst, however you want to look at it, way of measuring 40 times. Because they use a laser start and a hand time finish, which creates a variation of 0.15 in the time, which is the difference between being what Brock Bowers really is and what this guy says he might be.
What an ass backwards way to perform a test that you're, like that is really determining, or that not as determining, but has a large impact on what NFL scouts, are going to view them as. Mm-hmm. So it's just like, what? Anyway, that's the ridiculous thing that it's hand timed.
But it's just, and there's complexities to it, but that are understandable, but it's not due to cost. And it should, and maybe the effort should be put into it, that maybe you should, owners look, instead of buying your 8th yacht in your 4th city, maybe instead
buy a laser.
you buy a bunch of lasers that work, and people competent enough to administrate them with the training, so your scouts don't have to do it. You don't have to act like Mike Brown, in terms of your penny pinching, and go from there. And you charge enough with those restaurants you got in your stadiums anyway. I'm sure they've got to pay a hefty fee to charge that much money in the first place. I really want to spend $75 on a Bronto rib? I'm not sure. That might taste good.
I'm sure.
Probably not. Yeah.
I'm positive I don't want to, but they could do this if they wanted to.
Yeah.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit about JT Sanders. I'm kind of out on him, but what leaves him out of the tight end 2 spot? Because I do think surface level, a lot of people are going to look at it and be like, it's obviously Brock Bowers, JT Sanders, and then everybody else.
Yeah. I think that he's a good after the catch player, and people like that athletic upside of making people miss and hurdling people and running past people, and that's all good. He has some issues with catching the ball that can be an issue. Certain types of routes that he's going to have to win against man-to-man coverage to become a primary option in a passing game, those need to be shored up too. So he's got potential there, but until he shows the reality that he can win, like Sam Laporta looked like a wide receiver running routes against defensive backs as a Iowa receiver. You could tell that. And he showed that it translated to the NFL. Jatavian Sanders looks like a player who could develop into that type of player, but right now it's not going to translate until he learns those things. So that's the difference, is that he can get there, but he's not quite there yet. So he's close. Like, I think he could start now in most systems because he's going to play in zone, but there's going to, within 1 to 2 years, he's going to be a starter. He may not be a high-end starter though, but if he can do the route thing, he'll become a high-end starter.
I question a little bit like a landing spot like Miami, where you get the allure of like, oh, the George Kittle role, but I don't think that he can really block like that.
No.
So and also, like you're saying, he's not necessarily refined in the pass catching skill set or the route running skill set.
Yeah.
So I think all that combined, like I just don't even see it if he got into a role that we would think is beneficial. He really needs that development, like you're saying.
Yeah.
What about Jaheim Bell? This is a guy who I watch a lot of, being an FSU fan, and I do not see what everybody is seeing right now and pushing him up to tight end 2 spot. Like I'm sure you've seen that all over Twitter and laughed your ass
No,
off. No, you
no,
haven't. It's
no.
out there. I'll find them and I'll send you some screenshots of them. They're absolutely out there where people are saying Jaheim Bell is the tight end 2, or he's up in that range. What do you see with him? Because to me, like it's almost like nothing is there for me in
Move him
terms of what I'm
down.
looking for at the next level.
Yeah, me too. Move him down 17 spots, and that's where I see him. You know, he's
Okay.
tight end 19 for me, like out of 22 that I watched. I looked at him and said, "Oh, come on, let's be for real. He's a fullback who needs a new
Yes.
position. He's a running back who
That's how
needs
they
a new
used him.
position." Yeah,
They
he
used him out of
was.
the backfield all
Yeah,
the time.
that's all he was. I mean, like, but people like Tommy Tremble too. And now they're
Fair.
looking for another tight end because Tommy's a special teams tight end guy who you can put
Mhm.
on, give him the screen game, give him leak out passes, and that's fine. But is he a great blocker? No. And Jaheim Bell's 6'2", so he has no length, and he's 241 pounds, and he has no size. So you're not using him as anything other than a fullback. And as a route runner, he wasn't anything amazing, unless you think that Larry Centers is going to come back, like the Larry, if you even know who Larry Centers was,
Wow,
which is
that's sending me way,
yeah,
way back.
which is
Yeah.
like, early childhood for you guys. And for me, was like, I was younger than you were when Larry Centers was a thing, you know, and he was just a dump off fullback, basically getting tons of little catches, you know, or a Todd Christensen type, which is even further back than that. Most of you don't even know him other than he was an old time
That one I do
commentator.
not know.
He
That one
was
I do
a
No
not
idea.
know.
he was a league leading tight end as a receiver for the Oakland Raiders for years in the 80s. He was a fantasy darling on volume, but he never caught anything more than 10 yards down the field. Like everything was just little dump offs. And he was fullback sized out of BYU. Okay. So Jaheim Bell, they're not, no. I don't get Jaheim Bell at all.
I love
He's a
it. I
special
love it.
teams player. If he turns into something good for them, but it's going to be because he fits into a very unique scheme situation, and that he was a great fit for that more than he was a great player who forced his way into a great fit.
Love that. Yeah, I totally agree there. And we could have talked about a ton of different players, but I just I kind of highlighted some that I think are, kind of out there in the ether right now, but also that I'm interested in just getting your thoughts on. So you really covered everything so well for us, Matt. I really, really appreciate your time, respect, like everything you do. Everybody needs to go to mattwaldman.com and go get his rookie scouting portfolio. It is, first of all, it's like super cost effective. Like this thing is like I don't even know how you were producing it for the price you're producing it for. I looked at it and I was like, what? Like, yes, for sure. So go out there, go check this out, get it. I highly recommend it. And I think it'll absolutely make you a better, first of all, if you're a scout at all, it's going to open your mind completely to like new possibilities. But if you are just like the fantasy player, the information is invaluable. So
You can get quick answers. You can dig deep. It's a choose your own adventure kind of way, and it's formatted that way with bookmarks. So it's easy to access, even if you hear 1,100 pages, nearly 1,200 pages, and you go, that's intimidating. That's too much. You don't need to go that far. But if you need it 2 years from now, 3 years from now, to see that player, who is that guy, you'll be glad you have it.
All right, so this is where I get to chime in, because obviously I've been quiet. Billy and I, we've been doing this podcast for 3-4 years now. We kind of do Billy's the film guy. I'm kind of the spreadsheet guy. I don't watch college ball. I mean, that's kind of a lie. Like if there's a guy that really pops out in the sheets, that I will go and watch him just because I want to see him play.
Sure.
But it's pretty clear that this is more his wheelhouse. But what I wanted to highlight after going through your RSP and a little bit of your website this year, I noticed you have the RSP gives back. And I think it's important to note that even though your RSP is very, very affordable, that I think that the listeners should know where also some of that money is going to with the RSP gives back program.
I appreciate that. Yeah, because for $21.95 you get a pre-draft and post-draft. So you're covered on that end. And then I do a rankings and projection service for $24.95 that I joke that I make you fucking pay for that if you just want the quick answers, you know. But
Yep.
but I do those things. Most people say I would pay the both for just for the pre-draft guide, not even the post-draft and the projection. So you get the sense. But one of the things that I thought was important is that, you know, after seeing the Penn State scandal a number of years back, I thought it was worthwhile to give back because as football fans, it's
Mm.
easy, you know, I watch that and it's just human nature. It's nothing against football fans. It's more about human beings in general. We tend to be tribal about things and we tend
Mm.
to support the things that we love and that brought us joy. So when something attacks that and there's a whistleblower situation, we always tend to attack the whistleblower and not the institution that the whistleblower is pointing the finger at, and rightfully so. So when, you know, when I saw how the Penn State fans and administration handled this whole debacle, and the crimes that occurred, you know, they changed their tune and they figured it out. But it's those types of things are very damaging to people who've been victimized, and it's a very common um, dynamic that happens with sexual abuse of children is that when they are abused and they report something bad happened, well, the it's usually met with such a level of discomfort and fear of how the optics are going to look for the family, going to look for the person they're accusing, if anyone's going to believe them, that it actually creates more trauma for the kids. So, you know, seeing that, knowing people who, you know, the older you get, the more you learn about people who have been through this kind of abuse, and it's a very prevalent thing in our world. It's an extremely and it's a very uncomfortable one. So, you know, I'll talk about it online that I give to this, and oftentimes I hear crickets compared to like giving the kids on Christmas, which is a nice thing. And shopping for toys on Christmas is great. But, you know, the kid not getting a toy and a kid getting something that they really shouldn't have gotten, you know, that's going to
Yeah.
last a lifetime and contribute to, you know,
100%.
contribute to all sorts of other ills that we want to address that are just symptoms of the root cause, because alcoholism, abusive behavior, runaways, prostitution, you know, exploitation of people, all sorts of things like that often have a root in sexual abuse. So the D2L, Darkness to Light, is the organization. Their website is d2l.org. They're designed to help adults learn about grooming behaviors and dynamics of abuse so that they
Mm.
can help prevent child abuse in scenarios where you're maybe a group of adults who are overseeing kids. That's not to say, you know, don't I want anybody to misunderstand and think that it's preventing adults from committing sexual abuse. It's adults from helping adults recognize other adults' behaviors that are grooming
Mhm.
behaviors that
Right.
we may not realize, and that where the dynamics occur, so that we're also not going, it can't be my uncle doing this, or my older brother doing this, or my father doing this, because that's a very uncomfortable topic. But that's where it mostly happens. It's not the
Yeah.
stranger in the van with no windows asking if
Yeah.
they want candy. It's someone you actually know that, and that's where it's even the most damaging. So, you know, they go through that, and they also teach how to address the situation when it unfortunately happens. So again, you're not doing additional damage to the
Mm.
kids as well as your organization when the truth eventually comes out, and now you look like idiots, you know,
Yeah.
and you look like awful people, and you
Right.
didn't, because you didn't understand. So Penn State has gone through the training. Fortunate for them, you know, with D to L. Michigan State with their gymnastics team, they went
Wow.
through
Yeah.
it. You know, so they've worked with a lot of people, individual civic groups, you know, institutions like this, and they have a very high rating on Charity Navigator. And the RSP gives up to $5,000 each year. It's been doing that
It's
for years
fantastic.
now, and
Incredible work.
we've given over $65,000 since we've started doing this, and it'll be over 70 now when I probably donate within the next month after all the IRS stuff clears. You know?
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. I know I steered the ship, but Uriah may have hit us with like the most important question of all. I mean, that's such an important cause, and you're doing such great work. Like, yeah, and great highlighting that, Uriah. I love that. Is there anything else you want to plug before we get out of here? You've given us over 2.5 hours of your time. Like, this is, and I know the content was so good. I'm so excited to get this out to the people. But is there anything else that you're doing kind of outside the RSP that you wanted to plug?
I mean, no, listen, you can find me at footballguys.com. I'm senior staff writer there, as I said. And so I do NFL work and study film all year. That, the RSP is the start of that. Then a continuation of that is the NFL film work I do for fantasy stuff at footballguys.com. I also almost said FF today. Isn't that funny? But you can't blame me. It's been a long time and I'm old. But that and then the RSP cast, you can see more of the podcasts I do. People like Brandon Angelo, FSWA Writer of the Year, Adam
Great
Harstead.
work.
Yeah, he's great, and folks like Felix Sharp over at Campus to Canton and Devi Leagues, and Bob Harris, of course, who's an absolute legend and one of the people that inspired me to get into all of this. And the first time I got to do work with him, that was like a career highlight for me. And now I'm goading him into doing profane work on Mondays with my show Feel It or Fuck It. So it's a complete full circle thing now.
What a great name. Feel It or Fuck It. Oh man, I'm tuning into that for sure. That's awesome. Well, I think that's gonna do it for us. Follow Matt on Twitter at Matt Waldman. Matt is one of the good ones, seriously. Like, if you listen to this podcast, you know that. Go give him a follow. Go buy his RSP. You can catch us on Twitter at Willie Beeman FF and at Uriah Dawkins. This has been Dynasty Underdog. We will catch you next time.